IB Nation, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. A little keys to victory for Notre Dame's game against the Clemson Tigers. They're traveling down to South Carolina. Actually, they're probably already down there in South Carolina,
Well,
ready
I
to.
think they'll probably head out either tonight or tomorrow morning because it's
Okay,
Thursday. Yeah,
yeah, and
they
it's
usually
not
leave
too
on.
big of a travel, really. It's
Yeah,
not too huge of a travel.
yeah.
So they'll be heading down though. Take out the Clemson Tigers, 12 o'clock noon Eastern time on Saturday. Notre Dame sitting at 7-2 on the season, hopeful to continue their last stretch of the season now going into bowl game, hopefully a New Year's Six bowl berth. There's a lot on stake, obviously, on Notre Dame side of things. On Clemson side of things, 4-4 overall record. This is a team that is fighting to get back any momentum that they can down the stretch. I mean, if they come in and lose this football game, we might be talking about a team that's going to be fighting to even make a bowl game in 2023. So Clemson has
Yeah.
a lot to fight for, and just the continuing and finding some progress with this program in the 2023 version. Notre Dame has a lot to play for, obviously, moving forward. We're going to touch base on keys to victory. Notre Dame offensively, defensively, working against Clemson. There's a couple keys that we're going to get you all started with because it's more of an overarching analysis as far as things that we need to see from the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Of course, we'll talk game predictions at the end. We will talk about game balls. We'll talk about key storylines. We'll hit on a little bit of everything. If you watch our Tuesday show, we kind of give you an outline of some things to watch for Clemson, who they are as a football team, what they do well, where the question marks are for them. Today, we'll go into that a whole lot more and then also talk about some of the key players that you should be eyeing for the Clemson Tigers this weekend. Also going to be a big recruiting weekend. I've gotten some insight to some of the recruits that will be down there to watch Notre Dame that are some key players that Notre Dame is also taking deep dive in and pushing for in the 2025 class. So a lot that's on stake this weekend, Brian, from a recruiting perspective, but more importantly, an on-field perspective this weekend. Notre Dame is going to try to get to 8-2, and Clemson certainly provides a very interesting matchup this weekend at 12 o'clock Eastern.
No, they do. I mean, this is I'm going to have something on this either tomorrow or Saturday, Ryan. This is a huge opportunity for Notre Dame, and I know there are two things that are masking how big of a game this is. Last year's outcome, which again, we said at the time was, I mean, we said it last year. That was a bit of an anomaly. If you play a week later, I don't know that you get the same outcome. I think Notre Dame still would have won. They were, I think, at that time of the season, they were a better team. They matched up well against Clemson, but it would have been a much more competitive football game. And the fact that Clemson's 4-4. And the reason they're 4-4 is they've lost 2 games in overtime, including to a team that currently right now sits in the top 4 of the college football playoff rankings at Clemson. And they've been a team that's had really bad turnover problems this year. But they're also a team with a great defense. You know, if you look at the Fermo efficiency index, Notre Dame is, think of how good Notre Dame's defense has been this year, how we're all talking about how great Al Golden has been. Notre Dame ranks 9th in defensive efficiency on the FEI. Clemson ranks 10th, 1 spot behind. This is a really, really good defense. This is a really big game. This is a program that has a lot of pride, and they're going to try to come out this week and get the ship righted. The ship will get righted. I mean, Dabo's not just going to fall off a cliff, right? The ship will get righted. They're going to clean up the things that are causing them to lose football games because they're not they're not necessarily just getting dominated, right? Like they got outplayed by NC State, they got outplayed by Duke, but they had chances in both games. You know, don't fumble the ball. They're, I think, 7th in college football in red zone trips. I mean, so like they're getting into scoring zone. They're just really bad at scoring once they get there. So you've got to make sure all the things that have kept them from being successful continue for at least one more week, right? That's going to be the big thing for Notre Dame. But that's also what makes Clemson dangerous, Ryan, because this isn't just a team with no talent that you can just kind of go out there and just, you know, like the Duke game where they kick your butt for 4 quarters and you just happen to have better players, so you're able to make some plays at the end. Right. That won't happen this game. So it's going to be a big test for Notre Dame. It's a great opportunity for the offense to show itself. It's a great opportunity for the defense to continue. Look, sometimes the battle isn't just us versus your offense. Sometimes the battle is we want to show the college football world that we're actually the better defense, right? Sure. Like that's also part of it. So there's just a lot at stake for Notre Dame this weekend. And as we said the other day, Ryan, 9-3 looks a whole lot different than 10-2. It just does. And this is, you know, you can't get to 10-2 without winning this football game. So it's a big opportunity for Notre Dame. And, you know, we'll dive into the keys to the game. As you mentioned, we'll do game predictions, we'll do a mailbag. But at the end of the day, man, this is about Notre Dame going out and saying, we are one of the best teams of college football. Yeah, I know we had a bad game at Louisville. I get that, but we're one of the best teams of college football. And if you are that team, you've got to show it in a game like this. This is your opportunity to kind of show the world, hey, we're really, really flipping good. Outside of a bad half, I would even say, of football this year. We're a really good football team. And a really good football team, to me, goes on the road and wins this game. I'm not saying you have to smack Clemson because that's not something anyone has really done this year. Even Duke, we talked about it. Clemson has the ball at the 1 yard line, 1st and goal, with a chance to take a lead in the 4th quarter. That game was a lot more competitive than the score. Clemson outgained Duke in that game. Notre Dame has to be able to come out and show that they're the better team. And we talked about the ramifications of what that would mean.
Yeah, I mean, Notre Dame has been at their best a much more dominant football team in 2023 than Clemson has. I mean, Clemson's been, for the most part, a very competitive and tough football team, in most games. Outside of the NC State game that got away from them a little bit, and you mentioned that Duke game, I mean, they were a couple plays away from beating Florida State. They're losing some games kind of in the 4th quarter, late stages, 1-score football games. Still a very competitive football team because at the baseline of everything, they have a very good head coach and they have a lot of talent still. I mean, if we fast forward to the 2024 NFL draft, I think some people are going to look at some of the players drafted on Clemson and be like, oh man, they have more talent than I thought they did. Like, when guys like Barrett Carter are drafted and Nate Wiggins goes in the 1st round and Will Shipley gets picked, and you're going to be like, they might have been a little more talented than maybe I gave them credit for going into that game because they just weren't clicking and they were struggling in certain capacities, obviously.
Yeah.
So it's a much better team than people think. Much more talented team, I should say, than people think.
Because right now, Ryan, I would assume that you agree with me on the following statements, and if you don't, you can say so. Nate Wiggins, you talked about, it's a guy that's probably going to get drafted. I believe Sheridan Jones is out of eligibility. I think he's a guy that gets drafted. Maybe not,
Possibly.
day 1, day 2, but Tyler Davis, as long as the medicals check out, will get drafted. Rook's going to have a chance to get drafted.
Top
You mentioned
player.
Barrett Carter, right? He's going to get drafted. If Andrew Makuba goes pro, he probably gets drafted. Now, I'm not saying all these guys are 1st-round picks, but the point is there's a lot of guys in this football team that are NFL players. And they have found ways to beat themselves this year. And Notre Dame has to make sure that continues.
You just mentioned, because Dane Brugler over at the Athletic is, in my opinion, the best draft analyst out there, and he has a lot of great intel, obviously, from the NFL.
Besides you, of course.
Oh, I appreciate you so much. But he had 2 players in his top 40 updated big board, which again is based upon feedback he's getting from the NFL. Both Nate Wiggins and Rook Ororo were both in that top 40 overall players. So yeah, man, they're going to have some guys drafted. They're going to have some guys drafted a little bit earlier than people anticipate. And so Notre Dame's going to have to bring their A game. And Duke Clemson has shown that they are a team that can be physical with you. They can keep games close, obviously, for the most part, and that they are a dangerous football team when they're not shooting themselves in the foot, which, that's been a big issue with them.
They remind me so much of last year's Notre Dame team. They really do.
Yeah.
Young offensive line mixed in with some veterans. Notre Dame had true sophomores at tackle last year. Right now, Clemson's playing 2 true sophomores at tackle.
Yep.
And it was a team where you're like, how does that team do that to North Carolina and that to Clemson and that to Syracuse and lose to Marshall and lose to Stanford and barely beat Cal, right? Like it's there's a lot of similarities there. They have a lot of youth, just like Notre Dame did last year. And that youth results in some days you're just not locked in and focused like a more veteran team, which Notre Dame will be. Sometimes when you're young, you make big mistakes and bad mistakes. And we talked about, it's not just the turnovers that are killing Clemson this year. It's when those turnovers are happening. You know what I mean? They fumbled 3 times at the 1 yard line this year, I believe. At least twice, Miami and Duke for sure. And I believe they had another one against Miami that was deep in Miami territory. So they're a team that they're just not out there. This isn't like 2007 Notre Dame where they're just terrible and young and just getting their brains beat in every week. So, and I'm not trying to spin this like this is some great team. I think if Clemson could eliminate the turnovers, they're probably 6-2, 7-1. I do believe that. 6-2 at worst. So you've got to be prepared to go play well. And Notre Dame also has to prove, Ryan, they can go on the road and
Yep.
be sharp and handle
Yep.
the crowd and be the more physical team and dominate. Because let's be honest, they've played what? 2 true road games this season, 3 true road games this season. They didn't play well in 2 of those 3. And then the other one, it took them about a quarter and a half and a rain delay to finally get going,
Yep.
right? The NC State game. So you've got a lot to prove as well as a football team that, hey, we're not just home front runners. We'll take this party anywhere. And Notre
Yep.
Dame has a lot to prove. And I think there's, as we dive into the keys to the game, Ryan, I think there's 2 overarching team, right, that things are going to matter in all 3 phases of the game that are keys that we're going to discuss now. And the first one, Ryan, and we've both talked about it, the turnover battle.
Yeah.
If you can't force, and you said this to me before the show, and is Notre Dame has to continue doing to Clemson what everyone else has done, which is get the football. And the Notre Dame offense cannot afford to give that Clemson offense short fields and cheap points. So the turnover battle, offense, defense, special teams, I think of the 2015 game, where Notre Dame comes out and they fumble the opening kickoff of the second half and Clemson goes down and scores. You can't have those mistakes. I think of Notre Dame's down 7-0. They get the ball against Clemson in 2015, and Tyler Newsome shanks a punt, gives Clemson the ball at like the 25, 30-yard line. You can't have those kind of mistakes in any of the phases of the game, and that's why that's just an overarching key. The turnover battle is going to be huge in this football game.
Well, why has Notre Dame's defense been so good the last few weeks? I think the last 2, especially, you look and say they forced 9 turnovers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they forced 5 against USC. They forced 4 interceptions against Pittsburgh. I mean, they have been incredible with turning the football over. You look at that point against the Clemson offense and you say that team is one of the worst turnover teams in the country, and they've done it in some really bad situations. You have a quarterback that, although he's only thrown 5 interceptions, you know that if you watch the film, like, he's fumbling the ball all over the place. You have good running backs, but guys like Phil Maffa have coughed the ball up on the turf, during this season. So they have had a major issue with that, which is, I think, is a big reason why not only have you stunted the offense's growth for Clemson, but also why is the point per game total so high for a Clemson defense that is statistically so great everywhere? It's because you keep giving them short fields and you keep putting them in bad situations. You keep putting them on the field when all is said and done, right? So I think that is going to be a massive conversation on all sides of things, which I think is why it's overarching, because Notre Dame has mostly been pretty good with not turning the football over. I know Sam Hartman threw 2 interceptions last week, but he's only got 5 in 9 games, right? So it's not like he's turned the ball over a ton. So I do think that that's going to be the difference, because I look at this game and I say, it has a potential to be a defensive, lower scoring game, potentially. And in those types of games where there's not much separation between 2 teams, that's the difference, right? The turnover battle, giving a team a short field, giving them 1 less possession, forcing teams into bad situations, playing the time management conversation and the field position battle, and you have a potential to put a team into a lot of bad situations if they're turning the football over. And I think that could be the separator for 2 teams that have at times struggled offensively. Clemson more than Notre Dame, but Notre Dame has obviously had their struggles at games this season and at a lot of moments where their offense is not playing up to the standard that the defense has been playing up to. So in that conversation of 2 inconsistent offenses against 2 very good defenses, I think the turnover battle could be the defining difference between one team winning and one team losing. I think that could be that type of game this week.
Yeah, agree. And we've seen that play out, Ryan, in this specific matchup. That has been huge. That has been a huge part of these games. I mean, I think back to 2015. I already talked about it. Notre Dame turns the ball over inside the 5 against Clemson. People forget that, the Chris Brown fumble against Clemson when they were driving. You think of the fumbled kickoff, and then it required a Cole Luke interception to stop another fumble from turning into a touchdown. And so people forget, you had a chance to win it, but Clemson was an interception in the end zone by Cole Luke away from blowing that game wide open in their favor, right? I think to the 2018 game, Notre Dame's first defensive drive, they just rip. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is running for his life. They punt, Notre Dame gets the ball at midfield. Ian Book gets sacked, fumbles. Clemson gets the ball at midfield, goes down and gets a field goal, right? I mean, we've seen these things play out. 2020, Notre Dame's on the verge of, well, first of all, 2 turnovers by Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah allowed Notre Dame to build a 10-point lead. A turnover by Ian Book prevents Notre Dame from blowing that game open. You turn the ball over, that allows Clemson to get back in the game, right? So we've seen this time and time again, Ryan, with this football team and in this particular matchup. And last year's game is a perfect example. Notre Dame didn't just come out and just score 35 offensive points and run Clemson off the field like Clemson did to Notre Dame in 2020 in the ACC title game. That was a game where the Notre Dame offense really wasn't doing a whole lot in that game, to be honest with you. It was a blocked punt and turnovers that really broke that game open. It was a 14-0 game in the fourth quarter and third quarter, late third quarter. And then Notre Dame's able to break it open with the first interception by Benjamin Morrison that gave him I looked it up as a 14-yard field. I kept saying 12 or 13. It was a 14-yard field. And then you had the pick 6 by Benjamin Morrison. You take those away, Clemson scores in there to make it 21-14, and all of a sudden they're another stop against Notre Dame away from making that a ball game, right? So this has been a huge part of this particular rivalry, Ryan, and it's even more, like you said, it's in a game where you've got 2 great defenses and 2 offenses that have been up and down. The one that can do the best job of protecting the football is going to give its team a good chance to win this football game. Now, there's more to it than that. And one other thing, too, Ryan, I will say this, a big issue for Notre Dame and its last 2 road games is they were not the most physical football team on the day. Now, I don't know that I'd say Louisville was more physical than Notre Dame, but I know Notre Dame wasn't more physical than Louisville. It was a bit of a wash. Duke was definitely more physical than Notre Dame. Now, this isn't saying the Notre Dame kids didn't play hard and all that. It's just saying they got out physicaled by Duke. The second key for me that's team-wide, offense, defense, special teams, you've got to be the aggressors. You've got to be the bad boys. You've got to be the ones that say to Clemson, y'all are going to be fine, but it ain't going to – you're going to get this thing turned around. It ain't today. And to me, turnovers and being the most physical football team in the field in all phases of the game is going to be another big key to Notre Dame winning this football game. And making a statement early that, hey, guys, this just isn't your day.
Well, we always talk about philosophy, right? And Notre Dame's philosophy is being built inside and out, being strong up front and being that aggressor. And when that's your identity, if it doesn't come to fruition, then that causes a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of uncertainty, not only in your minds, but on the scoreboard more often than not. So foundationally, that's how Notre Dame is built. That's how they need to play. That's how they need to dominate a football game. That's how they need to play. And also I would say it too, like this, Brian, like the big thing about physicality for me is that physicality. So if Notre Dame plays against Clemson, where it's a wash, Clemson plays physically, Notre Dame plays physically, it's just a really good stalemate back and forth, or Clemson out physicals you, that is where skill gets highlighted more than, obviously, like that becomes kind of the differentiator in a football game. And Clemson has skill, guys. They do. They have a couple very good running backs. Defensively, they have one outstanding corner and another good corner. They have some linebackers that can run, like Barrett Carter. They have some skill that can hurt you if you let it. But how do you stop that skill? By dominating Tyler Davis, Rukororo, so that Barrett Carter cannot run sideline to sideline, where he gets caught in the wash and he has to play through contact and be able to stack and shed at the point of attack. You have to be able to counteract a Will Shipley behind the line of scrimmage if he's able to play. How do you do that? Howard Cross, Riley Mills are more aggressive and better football players than what Clemson has on the interior, or you're able to set the edge against Barrett Miller, who is a talented offensive tackle, but if you punch him in the mouth, becomes a lot less talented if he's playing on his heels a lot during this football game.
Because he's still young. I mean, him and Colin Sadler are big, tough kids, but they're still young. And that means experience, but it also means they're not in year 5 of a strength program, right?
Exactly.
And I will say this too, Ryan, the move of putting Tristan Lee to guard immediately made that line look different, in my opinion. the Mays kid was the really big weak spot in that offensive line. So does this can't be the game that the offensive line puts it together? I mean, and I think you nailed it at the very beginning, Ryan. This is who Marcus Freeman says this program is going to be. And you win games like this by thriving at your identity. And that's what Notre Dame's identity is. And again, physicality isn't just come out and run the football for 280 yards and hold them and make them rush for -20. Physicality is your receivers. First drive on the road against Louisville, you throw a jump ball, not a great ball, but your receiver just completely gets pushed out of the way and the cornerback makes the play. Right? I mean, it's your blocking on the perimeter. If you can make one block with your receiver against their safety, you've got a 15, 20-yard gain. Instead, the safety just tosses your receiver aside and goes and makes the play. Physicality is an 11-man thing. And that's one of the things that really, like, to me, I say it all year, and we're going to keep saying it, we're still learning about Marcus Freeman as a head football coach and what he can get his team to be. And this was one of the things about last week's game, Ryan, because the one thing we said, Pitt is going to bring it. And Notre Dame out-physicaled Pitt. I mean, really out. I mean, but it wasn't just the line. And I would argue the dominance physically of the receivers was more than even the line versus the line. I mean, the receivers physically dominated Pitt in that game, in the run game.
How about Chris Tyree on that punt return, man? That wasn't all about speed. That was physicality and ability to break tackles.
Exactly. And to me, that's where, okay, that's got to be who you are. It can't just be this is who you were against USC and Pitt. So we've seen this trend in the right direction since Louisville. We've just got to make sure that it wasn't an anomaly, and this is just who Notre Dame is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's said perfectly. And because Clemson is also, like, they've had skill in the past, right? Like, you've mentioned the times of T. Higgins and Justin Ross, and before that, the Mike Williams of the world. And Clemson's had skill, but Clemson has also been built off of with the best Clemson teams in the world were led by their defensive line, right? And the ability to really dominate there. The Christian Wilkins of the world, the Xavier Thomases as a freshman, the Cleveland Farrells, the really good Kevin Dodd, who was drafted in the second round by the Carolina Panthers. Like, when they've been their best, Dexter Lawrence, when they've been their best, it's been that they are more physically demanding and aggressive than you are as well. So if Notre Dame's able to win a battle like that against Clemson, I also think that's a shock to their identity a little bit, right? Because right now, Clemson, they don't have the playmakers outside that they have in the past offensively, for instance. They don't have those types of guys. They're still a team that defensively is built off of, you have Tyler Davis, you have Rook, you have a pretty solid edge. I mean, Tamarian Parker is going to be a stud someday, guys. I mean, he's already pretty good as a true freshman.
Same with Peter Woods. Peter Woods is going to be the next interior star for Clemson, in my opinion.
Yes.
Agree with you.
So you're still built that way, man, and Clemson's still built that way. So if Notre Dame is able to out-physical Clemson, not only are you playing into your own identity and becoming more confident, you also shock the system of Clemson and be like, dang, man, that's why Notre Dame won last year. That's why they won last year. It was the fact of, because you threw for 90 yards last year, a little less than 90 yards offensively. Right. You won last year because Notre Dame was more physical than Clemson, and Clemson was like, dang, we don't have an answer for that. We don't have an answer because that's how we're built too. That's how we are as well.
Do you want to hear something crazy? In the Notre Dame Clemson game, twice, in the matchup since 2015, twice a team has thrown for under 100 yards in this matchup. Both teams won.
It's crazy.
Clemson in 2015, Notre Dame in 2022. Why? As good as that Notre Dame offensive line was in 2015, on that day, Shaq Lawson, that group, beat them up. They were the more physical unit across the board. And same thing in 2018. Notre Dame lost the battle in the trenches. Now, they held their own, but you can't hold your own against Clemson when you're a team that's built on the lines. 2020, the regular season, Notre Dame's offensive line and defensive line dominated that game. In the ACC title game, they did not. Last year, Notre Dame dominated in the trenches. So it's just this is how this game has gone. So this isn't just theoretical and playing to Notre Dame's identity, which is key number one. But the second part is the team that has been more physical has primarily won these games. And so that's going to be a big part of it. And speaking of physicality, I also forgot to mention Luke Talich's dad sent me the video of Luke just pancaking a guy on Chris Tyree's punt return. right? But like those are all parts of it. Like it becomes a mentality where I want to be the guy to deliver the big hit. I want to be the guy, that makes the big stop. And it just becomes a team. I want to be the guy that makes that dominant block to open a guy open. I mean, Rico Flores I've seen Rico celebrate harder on some of his blocks than I've seen him celebrate after catching a touchdown against Ohio State. Like that's the mindset you want from your kids, right? Like Tobias Merriweather. I've seen Tobias Merriweather in games where the ball never comes his direction, and yet he's blocking his butt off down the field. That's a mindset that you have to have as a football team, and these are games where it has to be at its peak. So those are some of the big picture keys for Notre Dame in this game.
Yeah, I mean, I even think of Nolan Ziegler posting that clip on Twitter where he absolutely decleats that kid on kickoff return, right? Where it's just like, yep, that's what they're built off of. So, yep, those are the two keys that we want to see. Again, a little bit more overarching. Offensively, Brian, as we get into this, and it should be no surprise here because this is our first key every single week because it matters so much. It's a foundational thing. Notre Dame needs to start fast in this football game. And I love this key every week because it's different for every single game and it's important for different reasons every single game. But I think last week you finally started to see Notre Dame's offense start to get a little bit of their mojo back, right? They're starting to moving the football consistently, had a couple bad turnovers, but we're still able to score 38 points of offensive production against a pretty good Pitt team, a team that was ranked pretty highly coming into that football game. Notre Dame, I think, is starting to feel a little bit better about themselves offensively. You start to see some wide receivers make plays. Rico Flores had a big play. Tobias Merriweather had a big play. You're starting to get a little bit more healthy at wide receiver over the last couple weeks. Notre Dame, I think, offensively really needs to start fast because you're playing against a good defense. So these kids know that coming into this football game, right? Like, you know that Nate Wiggins is a good player. You know Barrett Carter is a good player. You know Tyler Day. You know all the names. But if Notre Dame's able to come out and just be a little bit of the aggressor and start off fast, I really think that's going to be a huge shot to their confidence after a week after getting things seemingly back on track against Pitt.
Well, the important thing for the Pitt game, Ryan, to me was that, number one, they didn't start fast because of the turnovers, but they did some things where I believe you could say to them, hey, guys, we're 2 mistakes away from this being a 21-0 ball game, right? Like, settle down, execute, go do your job. And after that, they pretty much did. But it was against a better defense, and they've done they haven't had this kind of success against good defenses this year. And Pitt's a good defense. They're not on the level of Duke and Ohio State and Clemson, but at least it was a step in the right direction. But it's even more important this week, Ryan, because I'm telling you right now, that Clemson crowd is going to be fired up. They're going to rally around Dabo. I'm telling you, they're going to rally around Dabo and that team. I mean, I can just listen to Dabo in his press conference this week, and he's just riling people up. I mean, it's just, all the things we've done, and you got to support these kids and all this other kind of stuff. And they're going to respond well to that, in my opinion. And the more they make stops against the Notre Dame offense and give their offense chances to score, the louder it's going to be. But more importantly, because crowd noise, I mean, if Notre Dame had to play Central Michigan at Central Michigan and that crowd was as loud as it's ever been, Notre Dame's still winning by 20 plus points. I mean, they're a better team. But this Clemson team is young and lacking confidence, especially on offense. And so when you look at the Notre Dame offense, they've got to take that. They've got to come out and put early points on the board and put pressure on that young offense. Put pressure on Cade Klubnik to go out there and make plays. Put pressure on Tyler Brown and the receivers to go out there and make plays, and the young offensive linemen to give them time and open up run lanes, because, guys, we can't keep falling behind this team because they're a team that relies on their defense just like Notre Dame relies on their defense. Notre Dame is a more experienced group. They can kind of handle, you'd think they can kind of handle a little bit more falling behind, which we saw them do. They fell behind Ohio State 10-0. What did Notre Dame do? Next 2 drives, boom, boom, touchdown, right? This Clemson team will press. When they get behind, they will press. Because if you look at a lot of their losses, Ryan, they haven't charged from behind and almost won. They were ahead and then lost. They were beating Miami. They were beating Florida State, right? Duke was basically an even game. You can't let this team get confidence early. Florida State let them get confidence early. And they were like, hey, we're pretty good. We are still Clemson. And then that resulted in them being able to move the ball pretty well against Florida State. And so to me, the offense starting fast not only instills confidence in them, which is very important, as you mentioned, Ryan, but it saps confidence from the offense at Clemson. Because when you're struggling and you know you can rely on the other side of the ball and that side of the ball is struggling, I don't think people understand that is not normal pressure. That's advanced pressure. Because now you're like, shoot, we can't rely on them to keep us in this game. Now we've got to go out and carry the team. And they haven't done that all year. They did that once. What, Charleston Southern? Right? You know what I mean? In Florida Atlantic. So it's big time pressure that you put on them if you can come out and get early points on your early possessions. It's huge for this Notre Dame football team to have early success on offense. Huge.
I mean, Clemson's only averaging about 28 points per game, and they've been a very below average offense so far this year. So I agree. I mean, if Notre Dame offensive is able to come out and say, like, hey, Clemson offense, you're going to have to score a little bit today, man. You're going to have to move the ball consistently. I think some of the defensive players from Clemson they're going to pucker a little bit and be like, this might be a little tough here, man. And then you're also, because you mentioned it, there's a lot of youth on this offense. I mean, you're talking about a sophomore quarterback that is still relatively new. You're talking about a bunch of young wide receivers, a pretty young offensive line overall as well.
Yeah.
And you're going to put them in a position where if they have to try to carry the weight because the defense is struggling a little bit against Notre Dame, who's off to a fast start, then things could get, I mean, like,
that's how you roll, Ryan. That's how you roll
for Notre Dame. Yeah.
Right. That's how you roll. That's what helped them against USC. Because they turned those early opportunities into points, and that put a little pressure on USC's offense. Hey, we now got to go make some plays. And then that started to snowball as they pressed more and more and more. You know, does Caleb Williams make the plays he's making on the picks if they're up 10-3 instead of losing 10-3 and 17-3? I don't know. But I do know that he clearly felt rattled and pressured that he had to go put the team on his shoulders early. And if Caleb Williams wasn't able to do that, well, I'm pretty sure Cade Klubnik's not there yet. I mean, Dabo said in his press conference, he goes, I think the kid's going to be a star. He's not yet. And I tend to agree with him, actually. I think the kid's going to be a great college quarterback. I don't know what kind of pro guy he is. He's smaller and all that. But, like, for a college quarterback, I mean, he has a chance to be a great college quarterback, very much in, like, the Colt McCoy type of career trajectory, where Colt struggled a little bit at times early in his career and then eventually became a star, you know, and you just got to make sure it's not this week. And the reality is if you start early, I just don't see him having the skill around him to get it done, in my opinion. So starting fast is clear number one. And then key number two, Ryan, and this is important. This kind of ties into what we discussed big picture. Notre Dame's got to establish the line of scrimmage, and that's not just running the football. Like, we didn't say, hey, they got to establish the run game. No, you've got to win at the line of scrimmage in all phases, because I'll say it in two ways, Ryan. Number one, if Notre Dame can't run a football against Clemson, it's going to be much tougher to win. And number two, I believe that Notre Dame can find openings in the pass game against them if you can protect the quarterback. Now, Clemson's not racking up sacks at the rate they have in the past, but they still put good pressure on the quarterback. And I pointed this out yesterday. Their pressure rate per game is about the same as Notre Dame's. Their hits on the quarterback per game is about the same as Notre Dame's. And so you've got to win at the line of scrimmage in all phases, Ryan, because if Sam Hartman gets time, I believe he will have success in this game. I believe the tight ends and the running backs and the receivers, there are matchups that can allow them to win some battles in this game if you can protect the quarterback. First half against Clemson, Florida State couldn't protect their quarterback, and they struggled moving the football. But as the game wore on, they started to find way. They were doing a better and better job of giving Jordan Travis time, and that's when he started to open things up. Notre Dame's going to have to establish line of scrimmage, Ryan, in all phases of the game. If they can't, this is going to be I think, an ugly, low-scoring game that Clemson will have a shot to win at the end. If they dominate in the trenches, the Notre Dame will win this game convincingly, because I have more faith that Notre Dame has the skill to make big plays against Clemson that they lacked last year in this matchup.
Right. Well, I would say it like this too, is that the Notre Dame, I'm just strictly talking Notre Dame offensive line versus Clemson defensive line battle. I think that it's a very interesting battle, because I think that Clemson, although I think I already mentioned this, Tamurian Parker for me is going to be a superstar eventually for Clemson at defensive end. I think he's going to be a freshman All-American this year, and he's going to be probably an All-American in a year or two. Like, he's that talented of a football player. But as a true freshman, you like the battle of Joe Alt and Blake Fisher versus him as far as they should be able to limit his impact. You should be able to
No.
potentially win that battle pretty consistently. And the rest of the defensive ends outside of Tamarian Parker are good players, not great players, but they're good. They're good, solid edge players. And I think that Notre Dame, I think offensive tackle wise, should be able to limit the impact of the edge. The interior offensive line versus the interior defensive line of Clemson, that's a completely different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
That is a completely different battle because on paper, Clemson should win that one pretty consistently. But I would have said the same thing last year when you have Brian Bresee and Tyler Davis and Ruka
And I would have
Rororo.
said the same thing against Ohio State.
Yeah.
Right?
And yep. I mean, on paper, Clemson with Davis and Rook and Peter Woods, that should be a win for them versus Zeke Correll, Pat Coogan, and Rocco Spindler. That should be a win. But if it's not, then you take the legs from underneath of Clemson defensively because that is it. Because let's be honest, the defensive coordinator, who's doing a good job there this year, he's coming into that game and saying, my defensive line can win against Notre Dame. And you're kind of in the back of your mind saying, that's a place that we're going to win. And if you're not able to win, then that puts a lot of pressure on the rest of your defense if you can't establish the line of scrimmage. That means that Barrett Carter and Jeremiah Trotter Jr. are going to have to do things a little bit differently than they typically do. Maybe some stuff that's out of their comfort zone. The corners and the safeties are maybe going to have to make up for some shortcomings in certain situations. Maybe you have to sneak a safety down in the box because Notre Dame is getting a consistent push at the line of scrimmage in the run game.
Right.
Maybe you're going to have to generate pressure from the second level more than you would typically want to because you're not getting a push as a pass rusher against Notre Dame's offensive line. My eyes are going to be glued and fixated. And I know everyone's eyes want to go to Joe Alt because he was also number 6 overall player on Dane Brugler's big board. So he's now generating the buzz that we think he should finally, right? I don't know what's taking so long, but it's finally there. But all our eyes want to go to Joe Alt because he's a future top 10 overall pick, 6'8", 320, All-American, right? That's where our eyes want to go. For me, I think that the tail of this game is going to be about interior offensive line versus that interior defensive line. Can you win that matchup? Can you do enough to say that you came out as the winner of the offensive line of scrimmage versus the defensive line of Clemson? If you can, then I think Notre Dame wins this game, and they might end up winning convincingly if that is an easy win for them.
If they win up the middle, Notre Dame will win this game. I mean, I'll say it bluntly. That is the battle you have to win. That can be the great equalizer of this game for Clemson. And Clemson is going to trigger their linebackers, but you've got to get to the point where Wes Goodwin thinks he has to trigger them. That's the key. I have to trigger them, or we can't, or we're going to get whooped because they're beating us up the middle. Why did Notre Dame run for 176 yards, which was easily the best performance anyone has had against Ohio State this year? Because inside, they played really well. They didn't let those. Now, those guys made their fair share of plays, and Ruka Rororo and Tyler Davis are going to make their fair share of plays. Peter Woods might, Peyton Page might, because they have a nice 4 deep of guys that they kind of cycle through, or 2 deep on both sides, but 4 guys that they cycle through there that have all made plays this year. And kind of like Notre Dame, where it's not just Riley Mills and Howard Cross. It's also when he's healthy, Gabriel Rubio's doing well. Jason Onye's had his moments. Donovan Heinisch has had his moments when he's gotten on the field. And so Clemson is very similar. It's not like just when you take the starters off the bench, they're in trouble, right? They cycle guys in and out that can play. And if you can win up the middle, and like you said, Ryan, force Wes Goodwin, I have to blitz now. Because what I've always said, you blitz because you want to, not because you have to. When you have to start blitzing, that's when you get in trouble. Because that's going to then, you got to bring the safeties down. Now, all of a sudden, Notre Dame's play action game, Notre Dame's run game, perimeter pass game starts having more opportunities. Now you're in situations where, if you can get through that first level of defense, you've got chances for big gains, right? That's where it comes from. Because Clemson can be gashed. They don't give up a lot of big plays. But when they start feeling pressured is when they get more vulnerable to it. When they start feeling like we have to go make a play on defense, that's when they get vulnerable to big plays. And Notre Dame's going to have to do that. But the key is going to be right up the middle, Ryan. You absolutely nailed it. You've got to win the inside battle between the tackles and Jeremiah Trotter, because he will be triggered in the run game a lot this game. So that's going to be a big key. And it's also true in the pass game. It's equally true in the pass game because if Peter Woods and and Rook and Tyler Davis are getting in penetration up the field, and Sam can't feel good about planting his feet and letting go of the deep ball, then guess what? They're not going to be able to get the pass game rolling. That could eliminate everything Notre Dame wants to get going in this game. And that's why it's imperative that they, again, establish line of scrimmage in every phase of the game, because if they can't, they're going to have a much harder time scoring. If they do, then I think Notre Dame rolls. I'm just not confident right now that they're going to do that. And when we get to the score predictions, you're going to see that from me. I'm not confident right now that the interior guys can win that battle.
Sure.
Just because they haven't done it. I mean, Ryan, I'd like to be, people are going to say, well, look what Notre Dame did to Clemson last year. Folks, this is not that team. This is not that line. Notre Dame hasn't played like that once this year. Not once have they been that dominant the way that they were last year running the football. I mean, just look at the numbers, Ryan. They've only run for in 9 games. Notre Dame has only gone for 180 yards or more 3 times. They've only gone over 200 yards twice. And all that came within the first 4 games of the season. In the last 5 weeks, they're averaging a little over 130 rushing yards per game, right? Whereas last year, coming into this game against Clemson, Notre Dame was coming off back-to-back physically dominant performances in the run game, and they had rushed for at least 223 yards in 4 of their previous 5 games, right? We had seen that line at times struggle, but at times be really, really dominant. This line has never been truly dominant. They've had good games. They were good against Ohio State. They were good against Central Michigan. They weren't dominant, not the way that last year's line was. So I can't expect them to just come out and do that, which is why you're going to have to be more balanced. But it doesn't mean that you still can't control the action, right? Because you're not just going to be able to line up and bully Clemson like you did last year. You're just not going to.
Right.
And that's going to lead to number 3, Ryan.
Yep, number 3, and you kind of hit on it a little bit already, but I think that when you're a defense playing Notre Dame, what do you want to do? You want to condense everything, make everything tight, and make them have to work in tight spaces. That's both in the run game and in the pass game. You want to make windows smaller. You basically want to eliminate the outside receivers against Notre Dame. You want to cycle everything inside. Well, Notre Dame, in order to get this box a little looser, because we've mentioned it already, folks, Tyler Davis is very good. Rook is very good. Tamarian Parker is a freshman phenom that's going to be a really good football player. Barrett Carter is really good. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is very good. This front 7 in general is a very good unit for Clemson. You need to be able, in order to get guys like Jeremiah Trotter Jr. uncomfortable and make them have to play in more space, you got to create some explosive plays in the passing game, man. You got to find ways to win down the field, right? You have to be able to do that, because that will, in turn, loosen everything up a little bit. Then that's where more run game success happens. That's where more perimeter stuff is just easy, right? Because right now, things aren't easy for Notre Dame enough. Things are very hard at times offensively for Notre Dame. And in order to loosen everything up, to get a little bit more space, bigger passing windows, bigger running lanes, you're going to have to create some plays down the field and create some explosives. You're going to have to do that in this football game.
Ryan, when you watch this Clemson defense, the reality is teams allow Clemson's defense to dictate what they do offensively. Notre Dame can't do that. Florida State did that early as well. When Florida State finally said, hey, guys, we got to let it rip. We've got to get the ball downfield. They had success. I mean, I'm going through the stats, Ryan, and there's like 3, 4, 5 games in a row where a team doesn't complete a single pass beyond 20 yards. And games, they only attempt 1 or 2, right? Because they're basically punked. They're punked by the Clemson front 7 the way that Pitt was last week against Notre Dame. The way that Central Michigan was early in the season, if you remember, where the ball was just coming out so quick, like there was no way Notre Dame could get pressures. And they just refused to attack not just down the field, but even the intermediate zones, the 10 to 19, right? So Notre Dame is going to have to find ways to get that 15-plus pass game going. They're going to have to be willing to take some shots. They're going to have to be willing to do some things schematically to try to free guys open, like kind of like they did against NC State, right? One of the best, calls of that game was, using Tobias over the middle and then bringing Holden Stace right up inside of him on a kind of a post snap switch, and he gets free up the seam for a big play. They did it again with Mitchell Evans. He didn't haul in the pass, but like it was there. And then that's the same concept they went to again against Duke, and Mitchell got open and made the catch on that one. You're going to have to do some things like that to get the ball down the field. You can't just come out and say, we're going to dink and dunk all day. And Notre Dame got into that bad habit in my opinion, for weeks. They got into that bad habit against Duke. They took a couple shots early and then went away from it for a while, right? Like they had the seam route, the post route, and then they got real conservative. They throw the early pick against Louisville, and then it seemed like they were unwilling to take those shots, right? You've got to be willing to take those shots, and then the receivers got to step up and make those plays, which we'll get into here in a minute. But schematically, there are going to have to be some things beyond just one-on-one go routes. That's not going to be what wins all day. I'm not saying don't take those chances, especially if you get to where Clemson brings the safety down and you've got a one-on-one, because if Sam Hartman throws it properly, it's a completion or an incompletion. He didn't throw the ball against Louisville very well. Now, Rico did a really poor job fighting for the ball, but Sam's got to put that ball further outside as well, right? That's just the reality of it. But you've got to take those shots, and that's what he ripped Clemson up on last year. I mean, him and A.T. Perry ate Nate Wiggins alive last year. Well, guess what? Notre Dame doesn't have an A.T. Perry on this team right now. But that doesn't mean you still don't find ways to get the ball down the field. And I really want to see if they can find ways to get the tight ends. This is going to be a big one too. Get Jeremiah Trotter and Barrett Carter to flip their hips. That's where you can have success against them. When they're having to flip their hips, which means they're chasing tight ends and running backs vertically, that's where Notre Dame can also open up some opportunities, not just with those particular plays, but the minute they flip their hips and get vertical, there's other things that Notre Dame can kind of bring underneath and do different concepts to beat them. And it's just overall going to slow those guys' mentality down a little bit. You know, if you can beat Jeremiah Trotter up the field a couple times to your tight end, maybe he's a little bit less, apt to just fly downhill a million miles an hour in the run game. So that factors into it as well. But Notre Dame is going to have to find ways to get the ball downfield and outside. The outside part is important too, right? Because that's something that one of the few things they had success with last year for Notre Dame is when they would go to their two-back sets and they'd put Chris Tyree outside and just throw him now screens. You remember that? They had like two of those early on. Those are some things too that you've got to spread them width and depth, right? And if they're going to have to do that, you can't just be dink and dunk and run your snags all game against Clemson. They'll eat you alive. You've got to soften them up and get the ball downfield and get the ball to the perimeter quickly, get the ball to the perimeter where you can take advantage of the fact that I think Notre Dame's receivers should be able to handle the Clemson corners in the run game and screen game. And then, I'd love to see some 21 personnel this week, Ryan, where you're putting Price and Jeremiah Love outside. If you're going to do, because I think Holden Stace presents some unique opportunities where you can kind of go 21 personnel and almost line up like in a 3x1 10 personnel with Holden Stace backside and Jeremiah Love and Chris Tyree in the slot and, Jaden Thomas or Jaden Greathouse or Tobias outside. I mean, there's some different things you can do to spread them out because I think that's an important thing too in this game, Ryan, is those deep shots and those down the field shots have to come with space. That's where teams have been able to have success. I don't think you can condense the box against them the way you did last year because you're going to need to throw the ball more. And you're just not that team that you were last year. They're just not. This is not, Notre Dame is not the team that went and just ran it all over down Clemson's throat last year. They're not, and Clemson's better, in my opinion, schematically this year than they were last year. Where last year they just relied on their dudes being better than everybody else. This year there's still that level of trust, but they're doing more to be aggressive and take the fight to teams that I didn't think that they did last year. And so I think Wes Goodwin is, to me, improved in that regard as a defensive coordinator, which is why, Miami ran for over 200 yards, 80 that came on one play. Now Notre Dame needs to try to hit some of those because that one play ended up being huge in that game that went into overtime. But I think Notre Dame has some chances to really hit some big plays in this game, Ryan, if they're able to spread Clemson out vertically and for width while also still putting an emphasis on being physical and running the football. I'm not saying you don't go 12 and 13 personnel. You do. I just don't think they can just do it all game like they did last year. That's I don't believe they can.
Right. Well, I think for me, it's about keeping a defense off balance and keeping them. They have to respect the different things that you're throwing at them, and creating some explosive plays and winning outside is a part of that respect, right? Because I think Clemson comes in the football game like every team should against Notre Dame right now. That you're going to beat me outside. I don't believe you. I don't believe you, right? And that goes right into our key number 4 in the fact that Notre Dame needs some guys to step up this week. You need your dudes to become dudes this week. And that starts, of course, with the quarterback position of Sam Hartman. We've seen some very up and down play, some very good, some troubling over the last few weeks. There's been no doubt about that. We've also seen pass catchers at times show their talent level and then out times be inconsistent. Same thing on the interior offensive line. But I mean, more than anything, Brian, like Notre Dame has some areas that I feel really good about. Like I feel good about where the running back room is. Even with Mitchell Evans out, I actually feel very confident that the tight end room is going to be fine. Like I feel like it's going to be good. Holden Stace and Cooper Flanagan and Eli Raritan, I feel like you're going to be good there. But you also still need some guys to step up in that room as well with the departure of Mitchell Evans. But more than anything, man, I think it starts at the quarterback position. It extends to the wide receivers in the passing game. And then, of course, you can put the interior offensive lineman in this bucket as well. Notre Dame needs some guys to step up because it could be schemed as well as you ever want it to be this week for Jared Parker. Jared Parker could call a great football game, but against a team like Clemson that has so many good football players defensively and guys that are going to play in the NFL, at the end of the day, your guys have to make plays when plays are available. They need to be able to step up in this football game.
Yeah, like there's a comment that was made by Joe Allen, use the unexpected players like Faison and Raritan. And that's good. I mean, that's fine. But those things tend to be like a play here, a play there. Right? Like this is what I'm more referring to is you've got to step up and say, hey, you're not covering me this game. And it's not just a play here, a play there. It's I've got to catch 4 or 5 balls in this game for 80 yards. I got to be money on third down. I've got to step up and make these big plays. And it's got to be at the clutch times too. Like again, I talked about this a couple weeks ago. I don't remember Avery Davis catching a single pass before the fourth quarter against Clemson. I don't. But he made 3 huge ones in the fourth quarter against Clemson. Right? It's that too. It's not that I just necessarily from start to finish took over a game, but it's when the team needed me, I went and made a big play. And so it's got to be all of it. And it's like you said, it starts at quarterback. I don't know that Notre Dame can have the performance it needs to win this football game, or maybe win this football game the way it could and should if Sam Hartman doesn't play well. I don't. Sure. And I don't know if this football team can win this football game at all, much less the way it should, if the wide receivers don't step up and play well. That means being physical in the run game. That means being physical as route runners. It means competing for the football and not making the mistakes that have cost them in the past. I mean, you can't afford to not bend your route inside on the backside seam and result in a pick in the red zone against Clemson like you did against Pitt. You can't. Because against Pitt, you're like, that offense isn't going to score. It doesn't. I mean, it's annoying, but it's not going to cost them a game. It can cost you a game against Clemson, and that's the difference. And so it really comes down to, and I don't care who it is. This isn't me advocating for this player or that player. I don't care if it's Jaden Thomas. I don't care if it's Rico Flores. I don't care if it's Holden Stace. I don't care if it's Chris Tyree, Tobias Merriweather. Pick a guy. I don't care if it's Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price. It doesn't matter. You just need guys to step up. The one guy that I will say has to be that guy is Sam Hartman. Yes. He needs to step up. But your positions that are known strengths have to be strengths. Like your running backs have to play well in this game. Your tight ends have to play well in this game. And then the receivers can be complementary. But if the receivers can step up and play, and I was listening to Coach Sweeney's press conference, and he said something that I don't know that Notre Dame fans necessarily would agree with, but I think he's correct because the results don't show it. But he said the last few weeks, that unit, the receiver unit, has been playing a lot better. And I believe it has. I mean, you watch the film against Pitt, you watch the film against USC, and even against Louisville, there were guys getting open against Louisville. Ball wasn't coming out, right? And then when it did come out, there were some drops. You think of the Chris Tyree, a drop touchdown, and who was it? Who was I talking to yesterday? I forget who it was. I remember who it was. A buddy of mine calls me yesterday, and he's reflecting on the Louisville game, and he's like, how I've always said in 2017 against Miami, if Brandon Wimbush hits Equinemi St. Brown on that post route on the first drive and scores, that game's a completely different game. I think Notre Dame wins. His thing was after Cam Hart forces that fumble, it's 7-7 in the third quarter. If Chris Tyree catches that pass for a touchdown, he thinks that game turns out completely differently. I agree. The point is, when those chances come, now you got to make those plays. And that's going to be a key in this game because they have been playing better, but this is going to be your toughest test since probably Ohio State, in my opinion, because of just how good they are at corner and safety and the pressure of the moment of the game. So they got to step up. It's that unit, especially Ryan, they don't necessarily have to dominate the game. That can be the run game, the tight ends, the backs or whatever, but they're going to have to make 5 or 6 just really good plays in this game at least if this team is going to win and win the way they should.
I've always said that a coach's job is to put players in a position to make plays, right? To create a lot of one-on-one matchups. But after you put a player in a position to make a play, it is on the player to make that play, right? Like they have to finish. You can't finish a play for a football player. You can't do that. That's where their talent and their skill set and their competitiveness now kick in. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, you are going to have to be on your P's and Q's against guys like Nate Wiggins. Like if it comes down to Jaden Thomas or Jaden Greathouse or Tobias Merriweather or whoever having to win on one-on-one against Nate Wiggins, you got to win it, right? If it comes down to Jeremiah Trotter in a one-on-one against Aldrich Estime or Jadarian Price or whoever, Jeremiah Love in space, you got to make that play. You have to make it. I mean, so yeah, if it comes down to Rocco Spindler in a one-on-one drive block situation against a Tyler Davis is way more experienced than you, and has a much better resume than you, but you have to win, right? You have to win those reps. Because the game really is, when you break it down, it's a game that's won based upon who's won the most battles during the contest, usually, right? A lot of one-on-one battles that decide if they win or a loss on the football field. I think Notre Dame's going to have plenty of one-on-one opportunities here because, again, if I'm a defense right now against Notre Dame, why would I not play man coverage outside? Why would I not do it? Yeah. Especially when you have Nate Wiggins and Sheridan Jones. Like, why would I not do that? So at that point, Jaden Thomas, Tobias Merriweather, Jaden Greathouse, whoever, you got to go make a play, man. Go make a play. You're Rico. Go make a play. And I think
Ryan,
let
me ask you this. Let me ask you this. Because you talk about the playing man. In the last two games, who's the guy in the pass game right now that the Clemson defense is going to be like, we got to make sure we're keyed in on that guy?
That's what I was going to say when you were talking about Joe Allen's comment. I was like, if I'm Clemson right now or any opposing defense, I don't even know the numbers of the Notre Dame wide receivers. We're just going man to man across the board and saying like, dude,
but there's
come
one.
Beat us.
To me, there's one. It's Chris, which even adds to your point. Their safeties are going to be zeroed on 4 down to the run game. That's the point that I'm making. Like, if there's any receiver, you're like, we got to make sure we're counting for him. It's Chris Tyree, which it only enhances the chances that you're going to get those one-on-ones on the outside. That's my point. Because if there is anybody in the pass game that Clemson's going to be like, we can't let that guy go. It's going to be he's your leading receiver in yards in this game, and no one's really close to him. He's your best big play weapon, and that's something Clemson cannot allow to happen. And he's made big plays in each of the last 2 games. And look, when you're a defensive coach, you're going to watch the Louisville game and be like, yeah, he dropped that ball, but you're going to be like, but the dude smoked the Louisville DB to get open for that. Right. And then so you're gonna have awareness for number 4, which only adds to the fact that if Clemson's the threats that Clemson does think exist in the pass game, they're gonna have watched Holden Stace go for 100 yards against NC State. They're gonna know how much Notre Dame likes to use the tight ends. They're gonna know that Chris Tyree is your best big play weapon, and they're gonna need to stop the run game. Ryan, where's all that located? In the numbers, right? In like hashes. That's where Clemson's focus is going to be. And Notre Dame's going to have to find ways to get the ball outside of that. And when it comes to make plays, it's going to be so important.
What Wes Goodwin right now is like Wiggins against 83 or 5 or any number
19,
that you throw out there.
17,
It's a win.
Right.
It's a win. It's a win.
Right.
It's kind of like the interior defensive line conversation I talked about earlier. Right now, if I'm Wes Goodwin and I'm this defensive staff, I'm like, that's a win. Whoever our corners are against, it's a win. We're going to win that matchup. And if you're able to get them out of that zone, exactly.
You got to make them pay for it.
And if you do, then Notre Dame has a very good chance to win the football game. They have a very good chance.
If the receivers play to their ability, Ryan. I'm sorry, I thought you were done. That's why I started talking.
Oh, no, I was done. I was done.
Finished with okay.
No, I was done. Yeah.
If the receivers play, it's simple as this: the receivers have to play their best game of the season against a good team. Not their best game of the season, because like I'm not expecting to have like a 75-yard touchdown on this series, a 76-yard on I'm not talking about that. They got to play their best game of the season. And if they do, that's how this game isn't close. That's the only way this game isn't close, in my opinion, unless Clemson turns it over a bunch, which is certainly possible. That's the way that, to me, they go out there and win this game without needing the turnovers and those type of things. That's the way they go out and put this team away. That's the way that this Notre Dame team shows the rest of college football, hey, we are big time. Because what's the one part of this football team right now? There's only one. There's only one part of this football team that opponents are going to look at and say that part of their team's not good. They're not going to say the offensive line's great, but they're going to still say the offensive line's good, right? It's good. It's not great. Yeah. It's just good. It's the receiving core. If that part of your team finally steps up, this Notre Dame team is going to be really hard to beat. They are. That's the final missing piece to me to this football team really exploding is that group right there. Last week, got off to a rough start, but they rebounded really nicely. Chris Tyree made some big plays, including special teams. Tobias makes a big play. Rico Flores makes a huge mistake early, rebounds it. And that's what I love about Rico. He made a terrible play. And that interception is on him, just like the interception against Louisville's on him. But it didn't faze him. He still came out blocking his butt off the next series. And then when he gets the next chance he gets to go make a play, he makes it. He catches it wide open. That's not the part that I like. It's the weaving and the making plays after the catch that you don't, that you look at and say that he caught that ball, 15, 20 yards downfield? It was a 60-yard gain, right? Yes. And it's that type of stuff. You're only going to get to me, against this secondary, about 4 or 5 chances at best where you're just going to be open. Right. And Sam's got to find those guys, and they've got to make those plays because chunk plays are going to be a part of it. And, we could have gone – you got to get big plays and all that kind of stuff. But it's more to it than that. It's not even just about you need big plays. Of course you do. But the big plays are going to come from your skill players stepping up and saying, we got this. And as we finish up, Ryan, it all starts. All the receiver, tight end, it all starts. Number 10's got to be that dude in this game.
Yes.
This is the game. This is what you brought him here for, right? When we started talking about when they got Sam Hartman, what's the first thing we said? The Clemson game. You put that run game with him and what he did to Clemson, and this is what they could be. Well, we haven't seen that team. This is your chance to kind of to finish on a very strong note at Notre Dame. We'll see if you can do it.
I hope so. And so those are the keys to victory for Notre Dame's offense against a very salty, very good Clemson Tiger defense. We're going to move to the Notre Dame keys to victory on the defensive side of the football next. Before we do, hit that like button for us, subscribe to the podcast, notification bell. Make sure to share this podcast, of course. We are going to move over, though, now to the Notre Dame defense and keys to victory. Brian, one thing that is super consistent that we do every single week, because this matters so much, we always talk about trying to make teams offensively one-dimensional, and I don't think Clemson is any different in that regard, because when I look at their offense and I say, Cade Klubnik, I think will eventually be a good quarterback. There's no doubt, but he's struggling. But the two players that I look at and say, those guys can give you some issues, especially if they get rolling, they get downhill, and they get some easy running lanes. It's the two running backs. And obviously right now, it seems like it might be a game-time decision with Will Shipley in concussion protocol to whether he's going to play or not. There hasn't been an announcement one way or the other. But even without Will Shipley, you still have Phil Maffa, who's a very good running back, a 230-pound plugger at 6'1", 230. And you have potentially Will Shipley in this football game as well. Clemson, in order to help this passing attack out, the ability to run the football would be a big boost to their offensive structure in general. Notre Dame is going to have to stop this run game on Saturday because, one, Will Shipley and Phil Maffa are very good players, very talented players, I should say. Offensive line-wise, though, Clemson's struggling, man. Like, they're not a great unit so far this year. They are struggling to generate enough push up front to consistently create running lanes for their two very good running backs. Notre Dame needs to make this team one-dimensional. They need to dominate the run game this week defensively.
For some reason, Ryan, Clemson just concerns me in that regard. They do. Because I look at the film and I look at the stats, and it's everything that you talk about. I mean, they had 207 against Wake Forest, but they only went for 4.93 per carry. They ran for 213 against Duke. They haven't been that team in a long time. And so when I look at this team and I see, Florida State, they went for 146, Syracuse 126, 31 against Miami, only 101 last week against NC State. And the stats tell you this should be a dominant performance from Notre Dame and, shutting down the run game. But when I look at Clemson, the reason it concerns me, and you mentioned some of it, Ryan mentioned some of it, it is the fact that they have talented backs. Even if Will Shipley doesn't play, they still have talented backs. You have a quarterback that can make plays with his legs, and I think they're going to tap into that a little bit in this game. And I see them doing some read zone and some different things where, they try to get slow, because like we talk a lot about Notre Dame needing to mess with the eye discipline of the other team and impact their reads and slow them down. Notre Dame is a very aggressive downhill team. One of the things that I promise you Clemson is going to do in this game is some quarterback runs and some quarterback read zone type stuff that takes advantage of Notre Dame's aggressive defense. They're going to do it. You've got to be able to shut that down. But the other thing, too, is I just look at this offensive line, and I know it's struggling, and it's struggling a lot because it's young. Will Putnam's a good center. They're really young at tackle. They're pretty young at guard. They've had some issues at guard. Marcus Tate's not a young guy, but Tristan Lee's a redshirt sophomore. They just put him in the starting lineup at guard a week ago. He had been playing a lot of left tackle. They play Harris Sewell a lot as a true freshman. He'll rotate in at guard and play. But I look at it and I'm like, but it's got talent. And that's why I thought this team would be better running the football this year, is because I really like the talent. And I just get concerned about this being the week where the talent arises. And that's honestly my biggest concern with the whole game, is that when it comes to this matchup between the Notre Dame defense and the Clemson offense, is this can't be the week you let them wake up. It can't. This can't be the week where you say where Clemson says, "Hey, we figured it out. We found the right buttons to push." And you need to make sure that you shut them down and don't let their run game get going. That's going to be a very important part of this game. Key number 2 is going to be getting Cade Klubnik out of sync. That's going to be a big key in this game. I mean, you're talking about a young kid with a lot of talent. I know people are down on him, and they're, now they're taking shots. Oh, he was overrated. He was this, he was that. And I don't believe he's overrated. I believe he's a kid with a lot of ability, a lot of talent. He's had some very good productive games this year. He made some big-time throws against Florida State. Kid passed for 283 yards against Florida State, completed 65% of his passes. Threw for 314 yards against Miami, hit some big plays down the field. Threw for 315 against Charleston Southern. Threw for 263 against Syracuse. Kid's made some big-time plays this season in the throwing game, but he's also made a lot of mistakes. And he's a kid that's dangerous with his legs, and those are things that you have to prevent him from getting comfortable. When you have a talented but young and relatively still inexperienced quarterback, you can't let him get into rhythm. You can't. And to me, points 1 and 2 kind of play together, because we say this all the time. If you shut down the run game, that tends to lead to, with aggressiveness and great play from the D-line, that tends to lead to then also being successful getting to the quarterback. That was true against USC. It was true against Pitt last week, where, yes, the goal on downs 1 and 2 is to shut down the run game, but you keep going if it's going to be a pass game situation. And so to me, that's going to be a big part of this, is just in order to keep him out of sync, is going to be getting into situations where you're dominating line of scrimmage, you're shutting down the run game, but then when the pass game comes, that you're getting hits on Cade Klubnik, you're having him throw off his back foot, you're not letting him step into the pocket. That's going to be a big part of it as well, is, getting that really good push up the middle. When Notre Dame's defense is rolling this year, they push right up the middle. When Cade Klubnik gets in trouble, it's when he has to spin out and try to make things, make things happen on the outside. Those are situations where he'll make mistakes. He'll throw the ball down the field. He'll throw an incompletion, throw a pick. It just comes down to getting him out of sync. And when he does run and he does scramble, got to get hits on him, because he's still a slight guy. So to me, it's the same as we talk about it. It's the same game plan you had against, not the same game plan, but same point of emphasis you had against Caleb Williams, same point of emphasis you had against Jack Plummer, same point of emphasis you had against Riley Leonard, same point of emphasis you had against Kyle McCord. And when you pressured Kyle McCord, the Ohio State offense struggled to score. When you backed off and didn't pressure him, he made throws that hurt you. And so It's been a consistent theme. When you've got a talented quarterback, and especially a young quarterback, you can't let him get into rhythm. And so that's going to be key number 2, because they don't have we've said a lot, and it's true. They don't have the weapons on the perimeter that they used to have. They don't. But it's not like their guys are bums, right? These are still good football players. The tight end is a talented football player. Yep. I mean, he's a guy that concerns me a little bit, because he's tall. Yeah. Yes, and you get him matched up against Notre Dame's 6'1" linebackers, and J.D. Bertrand or Jack Kaiser, he can do some damage. Adam Randall's a guy that I'm just waiting to break out. Like he's Clemson's version of Tobias Merriweather. Like, you see the talent, It's obvious. He just hasn't
Hopefully not
figured
this
it out
week.
yet, right?
Hopefully not
You
this
got to
week.
make
Yeah.
sure it's not this week, right? That's the key.
Yeah.
And the way that you make sure it's not this week is to pressure Cade Klubnik early and often. That's the key.
Yeah.
If he's thrown off his back foot, if you can speed up this kid's process, he's in trouble. And it's not because he's not a good player. It's not because he stinks or he's overrated. It's because he's young.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what it comes down to. And you just can't let him get because he is confident and he is talented. So on the flip side, Ryan, if he does have time, if things do slow down for him, that's where Cade Klubnik can give you a lot of problems. Because I know that everybody's likes to bash the kid now. This kid is dangerous for Notre Dame. If you don't pressure him, he's dangerous. If you pressure him, he's going to look like a young quarterback and make mistakes. But you can't let this be his I've arrived moment. Let that be next week. Let that be against North Carolina in a couple weeks or something. Just don't let it be this week. I almost wanted to make that point number one, Ryan, but I felt like number one built to number two. Like it leads to the best way to to slow Cade Klubnik down is to not let them run the ball. And then now all the pressure is on him. But man, I wanted to put this number one because this kid probably scares me, but just concerns me more than anything else. If he gets going, he can hurt you. And I know that hasn't happened yet, but it's going to happen to somebody. Cade Klubnik is going to have that I've grown up moment. It's going to happen. You just got to make sure it's not on November 4th. That's got to be the key.
Well, I mean, he is a kid because no quarterback wants to get pressured. Like no quarterback has ever been like, you know what? I want to get pressured because I want to ball out. Like no one does that, right? No one does that in their mind. But when you're young, especially and inexperienced, that's where a lot of turnover-worthy plays happen. That's where a lot of inconsistency happens. That's where accuracy kind of goes out the window and you become a little bit erratic, right? And Cade Klubnik is no different to that fact. But I mean, we saw Caleb Williams when he's getting pressured and those types of things as a third-year player, a guy that had just torched Notre Dame the year before in key situations, struggle in that capacity and struggle to improvise and get around that pressure and to be able to fight back against that pressure. And if you could do that against Caleb Williams, if you do that against some of the other quarterbacks from the schedule,
Riley Leonard had similar issues. He was sub 50% throwing against Notre Dame.
Yep. And if you could do it against those kids, you can certainly do it against Cade Klubnik. But again, I agree. There is going to be a game where it all clicks and things start moving in the right direction. Everyone has that moment. Happens at different times for different people, but there's always that game for everyone that played that the game just slows down and things just look like it's happening at a different pace. And hopefully this doesn't happen for Cade this week.
Right.
Hopefully it doesn't. But you have to, in order for it to not happen, getting early pressure is a big thing, right? Because then he's going to go back in his mental process of like, oh man, here we go again. Here we go again. It's going to be another one of those games.
As a young quarterback, he's still close enough to his high school days where he thinks he can just throw the ball up to Jaden Greathouse and go make a play. Like he makes throws thinking that's going to happen. And that's what I say is like, that doesn't happen in college, right? Like you've got to, it's just a different ball game. You've got to be able to make smarter throws. And he's starting to get to that point now, Ryan, where he's starting to pressure. He's starting to press. I think he feels the heat. He hears the noise. And you could see him, he feels the pressure, not so much like when I mean pressure, I don't mean it so much of like, the fans are getting to him. I just mean like he knows this offense is the problem. I'm the quarterback. I've made some bad plays and some big moments. I've got to make up for that. I've got to carry this team. I've got to do, and that's not something that a sophomore should be doing. And unless you're just a unique type of player in a unique situation like Caleb Williams was last year in a very unique situation. And if he's not comfortable, he'll press and he'll make mistakes. And that's how Notre Dame can blow this game out. But it all boils down to Ryan. It still comes down to you've got to win in the trenches. And then that leads to point number 3. It all builds on each other. Early down success. That's a huge part of this game. Huge part of this game, Ryan, is early down success. The more you let Clemson stay on schedule, the better they'll be. The exact opposite is true. The more you put Clemson in harder to convert situations on second and third down, so not just third down, but second down as well. The more second and 10s, the more second and 11s, the more second and 9s, you put Clemson in, the better opportunities you have to make stops. And so early down success is going to be key, because the way that they can have success running the ball and have Cade Klubnik be successful is get in 2nd and 2s, get in 3rd and 2s, where it's like, hey, we still have all the options on the table. And so those things all play together. Early down success is going to be huge for Notre Dame in this game.
Well, of the games I've watched, foundationally, it seems like they do want to run a lot of RPO action out of things, right? Everything kind of works off that run game. So they are rhythm-based offense, right? And it's very easy to be a rhythm-based RPO system when you're constantly in 2nd and 5, 2nd and 4s, 3rd and 2s. Like that's kind of the pace that you want to play with, and kind of the just working through that structure consistently. So when you put a team in a 2nd and 11, that's a rhythm-based offense, that takes the rhythm out. You have to get off schedule a little bit. You have to get out of your comfort zone a little bit. And I think that is, if Clemson is clicking and just is consistently being kind of a methodical offense, that's the worst case scenario. I'm not worried about Clemson creating a bunch of big plays in this game. I'm really not. I'm not worried about, that the outside receivers going for
not
60
if Notre Dame plays their game. Right. It would have to play that they're not focused. They're not playing hard.
Right.
They're not. Right, it's not going to happen within the Notre Dame's doing what they're supposed to do, and those Clemson guys are just too good to stop.
Nothing I've seen from the secondary for Notre Dame, Cam Hart, Benjamin Morrison, Xavier Watts, the other backup corners, Christian Gray, Jaden Mickey, nothing this year has showed me that they are going to be in a bad position and just let guys loose. I haven't seen anything that kind of leads me to that distinction. But I think that, and I don't think Clemson's pass receivers as of today are necessarily those guys that are going to thrive off of a bunch of big plays, right? Like they're not creating a bunch of explosives. They are a team right now, until they change their identity a little bit, is a team that wants to just keep it moving, man. Keep the sticks moving. Let's put together longer drives. Let's keep this thing on schedule. Notre Dame needs to make that uncomfortable. And the best way to make that uncomfortable is put them behind the sticks. 2nd and 1, 3rd and 9. I mean, 2nd and 11, excuse me. 3rd and 9, 3rd and 8, 2nd and 12. Like you want to keep a team 2nd and 10. Like you just want to keep negatives or just nothing, right? Nothing each play, early downs. And then that'll put them into a tough spot. It'll put them into a really tough spot against this team.
They're going to hit a couple plays. I mean, NC State hit a couple plays. It just can't be that consistent stuff, right? It can't be, and it can't be scoring plays, and that's going to, like you said, that's going to be the key. And then number 4, Ryan, again, shut down the run game, get Cade Klubnik just out of, speed up his process, speed up his feet, speed up his arm, and then put them in tough situations on 2nd and longs, 3rd and longs, and all of a sudden, boom, you get the football. And that's going to be a big part of it, right? This is a team that has put the ball on the ground more than I think any team in college. I know I'm pretty sure they've lost more fumbles than any team in college football. And right. Yes, I believe they have lost 10. They're second to last. Yeah. Nebraska has lost 11. They've lost 10. And when you look at where they rank as far as fumbles on the ground, they rank 122nd in most fumbles. And then 3 of the teams behind them have played one more game. So they've put the ball on the ground 16 times. That's 2 per game. They're averaging over 1 lost fumble per game. When the ball's on the ground, you've got to get it. Now, first of all, be in position to make the plays and get him out of sync and all that kind of stuff. He doesn't make – and, you've said he's only thrown 5 picks, and that's true, Ryan. But I will say he has put himself in position where he could throw a few more picks against better defenses. And this is that defense. And you've got to – because he does have a stronger arm than I think people realize, and he doesn't know how to throw with touch a lot. Like he puts heat on everything, and I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but not too much.
Yeah.
You're going to have some
overthrows, a lot of –
Yes.
Agreed.
And if he's doing those things on his heels, just like the Pitt kid last week, why did he throw the second interception to Xavier Watts? Because he was trying to throw over the middle, but he's throwing off of his back foot because he was getting pressured and the ball sailed. Boom. Get a shot at, he's trying to throw a deep route and maybe your corner gets beat. Here's the thing, Ryan, like your corner actually gets beat. Adam Randall beats him off the line and he's dropping back and he's going to throw that go route, but here comes Riley Mills right in his face, or Howard Cross, and he's got to throw that ball over top and it floats. And next thing you know, that's how Ramon Henderson or Xavier Watts or DJ Brown has time to get over and make a play on it, or the corner has time to recover. So there's going to be those opportunities in this game to get the football. Number one, you've got to create those opportunities. Number one, and that's point 1, 2, and 3. And then when those opportunities come, you got to get the football. Got to get the football. And when a team is struggling this much, and this is where the confidence part comes from, Ryan. If you eliminate turning the ball over, this Clemson team can score. That's a simple fact. I mean, guys, they rank 7th in college football in most trips into the red zone. They can get into the red zone. They just haven't been able to score. Why haven't they been able to score? They turn the ball over a ton. And their field goal kicker is not very good either, which is, we could throw that into a key as well, as make them kick field goals, because they have a 50-50 shot at making it right now. But when you get those shots, get the ball. Because if Notre Dame can jump out, this ties back to if Notre Dame can get off to a fast start offensively and Notre Dame can accomplish these things, this game could get out of hand. It really could. I don't know that it will, but it could, right? Just like it could have against Florida State, but Florida State's D-line or O-line got their butts kicked in the first half by Clemson. Fact. Okay? That allowed it. Clemson was able to make some big plays early because Florida State's defensive line wasn't putting the pressure on Clemson that other teams have, or that they have on other teams. They weren't rattling Cade Klubnik early. They were allowing the run game to generate plays. Will Shipley was making plays in the screen game. Like, they were doing all the things we're saying you can't let them do. They were doing it early against Florida State. And that's why at one point in time they led Florida State by 10. Right? And so you can't allow that to happen against them, in my opinion, because this is a much more they got a lot more experience under the belt now than they did when they played Florida State. And they'll be in better position to be able to kind of overcome those things. That's why jumping on them early is important, because that's how the snowball happens, in my opinion. You get them behind, and now all of a sudden Cade Klubnik's like, I got to go make a play. That's exactly where you want him to be in this game. I may not want him to be there next year, in 2 years, or whatever, but right now that's where I want him to be. And so those are the keys. Those are the important parts. Last thing, Ryan, special teams wise, this is very much a do no harm game. If you make a play, great. That's never a bad thing. Block a punt, return a punt. I mean, they've scored a touchdown on special teams these are the last 2 games. If they can keep that streak going, phenomenal. But the big key is do no harm. And the last time Notre Dame was played at Clemson, they lost a fumble on a kick return, and they shanked a punt that gave Clemson a 25-yard field. Right? You can't have those mistakes in this game. Can't. Get points when you get them. Win the field position battle. Protect the football. That's so huge in this game, Ryan. So huge.
Well, and the special teams is really rounding into shape now. After some early season struggles, they're starting to play a lot better football now. We've seen a kickoff return, and the kickoff return unit's starting to look a little bit better, which has been great. Spencer Schrader is becoming more consistent of a field goal kicker. It's fantastic. Good. Punting has been pretty solid most of the year for the bigger part of it. We saw Chris Tyree obviously take a punt back, which was a big boost. I mean, you have 3 kids right now that are averaging over 10 yards per punt return, by the way. I know Matt Salerno isn't playing right now, but all right, punt return average is pretty good right now. Cool. You're starting to cover a little bit better. I mean, so the special teams has been a unit that started rough, but has really taken its game to the next level down the course of this season. So shout out to Marty Biaggi, who is really Biaggi, that has really gotten that unit starting to play a lot better. Players are starting to make plays, which you obviously want to see. And if this is a game where Notre Dame is able to make another big play on special teams, great. But I agree with you, kind of like the no turnover thing. Don't shoot yourselves in the foot on special teams, man. No muff punts, no stupid coverage mistakes, no, letting a guy loose on a punt. They're just stuff like that, man. Like just be solid. Be solid all across the board. And if you can excel, great. But if you don't, you're fine as well. You're fine.
So like Notre Dame hasn't blocked any punts this year. Okay. Right. And that part of the game is not as good. But like you said, I think you nailed it, Ryan. It's not just the returns. Those are sexy. Those are the sexy plays. Those are one that gives you points. They've broken a kick return. They've almost broken 2 other kick returns in the last 2 games. They broke a punt return this last game with Chris Tyree. But to your point, Ryan, look at the kick return average the last 2 weeks. Number one, Louisville had no kick returns. They just kept kicking out of bounds, which I'm totally fine with. But also the last 3 weeks, USC and Pitt both had 3 returns. They both averaged under 16 yards per return. Like they were pinning people deep. That's huge. You look at the punt return game, and in 5 of your last 6 games, teams have averaged 3.5, 8, 7, 7, and -6. The one exception was USC, and that was just because that kid's going to be the most dynamic punt returner, kick returner we've seen in college football since Devin Hester, in my opinion. Like
Probably
he's gonna do for USC in the return game the next 2 years what Rocket did at Notre Dame. I mean, we'll see what kind of receiver he becomes. I think he's going to be a good receiver too, but I know for a fact he's going to be a game changer in the return game. And he just made a great play. I mean, he cut back, and it's just like Clemson doesn't have Zachariah Branch. That's what it comes down to. Outside of him making that one play, the punt coverage team has also been very good. So, yes, if you're not going to have the sexy plays, the pump blocks and those type of things, that's fine. I mean, those are nice too, but you better at least be good in coverage. And that's where I'll give Marty Biaggi credit, because that's an area where Brian Mason's units weren't good last year. If we're going to be honest, Brian Mason did a lot of good things at Notre Dame last year. Big returns and great coverage were not necessarily areas where they were great. They were great in the pump blocks and field position because those pump blocks force type of things, but they were prone to give up 15, 20-yard returns and things like that. And they're doing a much better job of that this season. I mean, if you look at the average, Ryan, last year Notre Dame on kick returns. Let me pull this up here real quick. Last season on Notre Dame gave up 19.4 yards per kick return. Right, this year they're giving up 21.3 because of how bad they were early. But if you look at the trends of the last 4 games, they're sub 20 and actually sub 18. That's where you want to be. So they're definitely trending in the right direction. You got to finish strong that way. That's going to be an important key. So
I agree. Yep, you have to. I mean, that is part of the unit. There's a part of the team right now that is trending in a great direction. So be able to maintain that momentum, absolutely.
In big picture, Ryan, before we go on to keys to victory, that's the big thing about this game. Notre Dame is definitely surging, right, in all phases of the game. Now, the offense has had their moments in the last 2 games where they weren't great, but overall, they're still playing much better than they had. The defense is playing lights out football. The special teams is getting better. They're combining big plays with consistency. Like you said, they're doing the things. They're getting the snaps down. They're getting the holds down. They're making their kicks. I mean, the biggest miss they've had in the last few games is an extra point, when it was 37-0, right? Like, okay, you can't have that, but like, that's you're doing good in coverage and now you're also making some plays. They're surging. They just have to continue that against Clemson. And if they accomplish these keys, they'll not only win, but they'll win convincingly. It's just, it sounds great, but it's much harder said than done. We're going to go to our game predictions next, but before we do, folks, do us a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and share this podcast. So, Ryan, let's do some predictions, man. This is a big game for Notre Dame, obviously playing Clemson this weekend, noon on ABC. It's another nationally televised game. It's just kind of what Notre Dame does, except when they choose to put a game on Peacock. But another nationally televised game, big moment. We've done all that. We've broken it down all week. Now it's time to make our predictions, and we're going to have some fun with this one. I know you and I see this game somewhat similarly, but I'm very curious, like score-wise, but I'm very curious to hear why you see it playing out the way that you do. So we're going to kick things off with you first, Ryan. Give me your prediction, and then tell me how you see this game playing out. We're going to add a little bit of an extra thing in there. We'll talk game ball, storyline, and then we've got one other thing that we're going to discuss as part of this one as well. So, Mr. Roberts, why don't you go ahead and kick things off with your score prediction between Notre Dame and Clemson and how you see the game playing out?
Yeah, I ended up landing on 27-17 Notre Dame in this victory. So it ends up being a 10-point victory. But I really think that the 10-point differential is not going to tell the story of this football game necessarily. I do think that these teams defensively cause a lot of issues for opposing offenses. And I am not here yet to feel great about the Notre Dame offense. I'm feeling better. It is absolutely trending in a better direction. But we are also seeing a little bit of a different animal in this Clemson defense. So I think that Notre Dame, this one is going to be very evenly matched early on in this game, probably into the deep into the second quarter, possibly into the second half, in the third quarter, where I think that it's just going to be a very back and forth kind of dogfights between Notre Dame and Clemson. I believe that the Notre Dame ability to create turnovers will continue this week. I do. I think that there's going to be a turnover somewhere in the second half that is going to create momentum for Notre Dame, and they're going to finish off the dogfights based upon their ability to take advantage of that turnover or two that Clemson's going to put out. I think that when you have 15 turnovers so far in the season for Clemson, that's a trend, right? I do think there's a randomness for creating turnovers at times, but Notre Dame, the last two games that they've played, have forced 9 total turnovers. Clemson is a team that puts the ball on the ground extensively on offense. So I think Notre Dame's offense is going to be able to capitalize on a key turnover or two, and they end up pulling away in the second half and force it to 27-17 Notre Dame finish.
So, Ryan, if the game plays out, so you're saying 27-17, but it's not a game where you ever feel like Notre Dame is challenged, correct?
No. I think they are challenged. I think that it's a back and forth dogfight until there's a turnover or two in the second half, as I think it's separated.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if the game plays out the way that you think it's going to play out, who gets the game balls on offense and who gets the game ball on defense for you?
I think offensively, it's going to have to be a guy that just creates a couple important plays for Notre Dame. Maybe it's an end zone play. Maybe it's a play that you just don't anticipate happening. I would hope that it's going to be Sam Hartman, but I'm not as convinced just because I think it's going to be a little bit of a dogfight. Like I said, I'm actually going to go with Holden Stace as my player of the game. I think that this is one where Mitchell Evans has been the key guy for Notre Dame. Now him out with the ACL injury. I think that we have forgotten, I know we mentioned it this week, that Holden Stace actually leads Notre Dame in touchdown receptions coming into this football game. So I think he has a touchdown. I think he creates a couple big plays. I think it's more going to be about Holden Stace making the big plays and the big moments that help Notre Dame win this game.
So, Ryan, if Notre Dame wins the game in the way that you describe it, what's the biggest storyline for you coming out of this game?
I mean, I think it's just that the defense is one of the elite defenses in college football, which I think we already think it is. But I think from a national perspective, you're going to now see them start to do it against a little bit more talented teams like you saw against USC. And I think it's going to continue the trend of, hey, man, that defense is legit, guys. Like, this isn't just a team that's making a couple good games and kind of stacking some, ugly victories. They're a team that is going to consistently, on a week-to-week basis, hold teams below averages and hold them in position where Notre Dame's going to have a chance to win. So I think it's going to be about the defense this week. I think that national perspective is going to be, dang, Notre Dame plays some really good defense. Hats off to that defensive staff over there in South Bend.
Did I black out when you gave your defensive game ball?
No, I didn't give my defensive play game ball.
Who gets your? That's on me. I moved on to storylines. That's on me. Who gets your defensive game ball?
It's super boring, but I actually think he's going to continue the streak that he's on. But I think Xavier Watts is going to have another key turnover in this football game. I think that there is going to be a point where there's going to be a game where Xavier Watts doesn't force a turnover. But I think when you're hot, you're hot. When you're on a streak, and I think the ball's just coming to him right now. I mean, we saw it last week where there was one interception in particular where you're just like, Xavier didn't do anything special in that play, but the ball just keeps coming to him, man. It just keeps coming to him. When you're hot, when you're hot and you have the magnetism coming, the ball just keeps coming to you. So I think Xavier Watts has another big football game this week.
That's why I could see something coming, like where it's DJ Brown that makes the big turnover, or Ramon Henderson, just because now that he's done it for 2 games in a row, Clemson's like, we're avoiding that guy like the plague. And usually when teams purposely avoid one guy, it results in a lot of turnovers for the other. We saw this last year with Benjamin Morrison, right? Part of the reason that Benjamin started getting hot is because Cam Hart was playing so well, the teams were like, dude, we're not throwing at 5 anymore. Like, Syracuse tried it, didn't work. This team tried it, didn't work. We're just going to take a shot at the freshman. And then they're like, yeah, that was dumb. Right. And I could see something like that where like DJ Brown or Ramon or even the corners, if they start saying, well, their best DB right now is this number 0 and 20 and 5 are banged up. So let's take some shots at them. But yeah, I could see something like that. But I mean, after the way he's played the last 2 weeks, like you said, Ryan, he's just around the ball all the time.
Right.
It just, I mean, run game, pass game. I mean, his turnovers this week could be scooping up fumbles. I mean, I could see something like that.
Yep.
Here's the other thing that we're going to add a little bit this week, Ryan. What is the biggest concern you have about your prediction not coming to fruition in a negative side of things? Like if Notre Dame doesn't do what you think they're going to do, what would be the reason why? What's your biggest concern going into this matchup?
I mean, I talked about this already a little bit, but there is a little bit of randomness to forcing turnovers at times, right? Like there is obviously a guy getting himself in great position and making a play on the football, but then there's also things like we saw last week where it's like, well, Xavier Ross was just in the right spot and the ball came to him. It didn't seem like he did anything particularly excellent on that football play. And then there's the balls coming on the ground and a weird bounce off the turf that goes into a Notre Dame lap. And I think there is a randomness to forcing turnovers at times. And honestly, if I think Notre Dame's defense is going to play really well, regardless of forcing turnovers or not, I don't see Clemson scoring a ton in this football game, which is why I have it at 17. But I think that the thing that would make me feel wary is if Notre Dame is not able to force a couple turnovers and Clemson doesn't turn the football over, this could turn into a dogfight where one team could win 20-17, one way or the other. You know what I mean? And I'm still struggling if I think that Notre Dame's offense can score enough where I think that they can win this one convincingly. So I think it's if they don't force turnovers, I still have some pessimism about what the Notre Dame offense can do consistently against a good Clemson defense.
For all the success Notre Dame has had the last couple weeks, they haven't played a defense like this since Duke. And when they've played defenses like this, they've only played two like this, in my opinion. There's only two defenses on the level of Clemson's. That's Ohio State and Duke's. And Notre Dame didn't do very well in either one of them. I would say Notre Dame did even better against Ohio State than they did Duke. They just didn't finish off some drives. And that obviously would have to change in this game. Ryan, let me ask you this question. Here's a fun one. Because I was like, you know what? I can't end on the negative with your prediction. If Notre Dame hits on 3 of the 4 keys on both sides of the ball, the final score of this game is what?
I would say it'd be 34-17. It's a much more convincing victory. Like 27-17 is if there's a turnover or two involved and you kind of eke it out at the end and it becomes a little bit more confident on the scoreboard than maybe it was in the important parts of the football game. I think 34-17, if you hit on a couple of those spots, it's like that game was never close, right? It's like you were up 34-10 and then maybe Clemson scored a touchdown late where it was just like you created a couple explosive plays, you were able to run the football, you put Clemson in really bad offensive opposition, so like it's 34-10 somewhere in the fourth quarter and then they score a touchdown late to make it look a little bit more serviceable. But I think 34-17 is possible if Notre Dame hits on all cylinders. I need to see it still offensively a little bit.
I'm with you, Ryan, on my prediction. I'm going Notre Dame 24, Clemson 13, because I'm going away from what I normally do, which is predicting what should happen, and I'm going with what I think will happen. And what I think will happen is Notre Dame's offense is going to have some plays here and there, but overall they're just going to struggle to consistently move the football. But it just won't matter because Notre Dame's defense is too good. Like the only way Notre Dame loses this game is if their defense just doesn't play like it has like all season. I don't know that Clemson has what they need to beat this Notre Dame defense. That's what it boils down to. So unless Notre Dame's offense just has a mess of turnovers, and the reality is as good as Clemson's defense has been this year, Ryan, they haven't done that a whole lot. Like they don't force a ton of turnovers. I mean, if you look at their, they rank right now 109th in the country in forcing turnovers. They forced 15 on the season. And so they'd have to do something they don't normally do. So if this game plays out, to me, just how these two teams have been all year, that's where the score comes from. That's what it is. It's how these teams have played all year. Notre Dame has not played great against the best defenses on the schedule, but I think that they'll do better against Clemson than they did Duke because Clemson's not as old and violent and physical as Duke was. And I still think there was a little bit of a Ohio State hangover in that game as well. That's not there now. And so that's where I'm at. I've been back and forth on this all week, Ryan. I thought about giving Clemson another touchdown, but I just have a lot of confidence. And we said this last week against Pitt. I just have a lot of confidence this defense is going to do what they're supposed to do and shut this team down. I really do. I mean, even Louisville that scored 33 points, that's 7 points at halftime. Like that game got out of hand early, and that game got out of hand when Marcus Freeman decided to to go for it at his own deep in his own territory with 9 minutes left in the clock. It was the offense putting the defense in those. And I'm not criticizing the coach, but I'm just saying that's when that game got out of hand. It's not like Louisville just came out and kicked Notre Dame's butt for 4 quarters. That hasn't happened yet. Ohio State couldn't do it. USC couldn't do it. Duke couldn't do it. Louisville couldn't do it. I just don't think Clemson is going to be that team that finally figures Notre Dame out. I don't. And that's ultimately where my confidence comes from. Now, on the flip side, Ryan, well, I'll get to that. I'll fall in the same order. So if Notre Dame wins this game the way that I have it predicted, my game ball on offense is going to be one of the backs. I'm going to go with Audric Estime. It's going to be a grinded out game. He'll get 95 yards on 23 carries and just kind of put it away with a late touchdown. I could also see it, Ryan, in this score being what you had talked about with Holden Stace, where he's the guy that makes the clutch plays, the big third down conversion. He's the guy that breaks the big play to get it open for Notre Dame to win this game. And then defensively, it's going to be one of the linemen. And who somebody had said in the chat, and this is actually who I'm going to go with. I think this game is right for Javonte Jean-Baptiste to have a big game. You got two, I think I like the tackles, right? As far as like just God-given ability, I like Miller and Sadler. I think that in 2 years, that's going to be the best tackle tandem in the ACC, in my opinion. It's going to be pretty good next year once they get some experience, but they're just young. They're not grown man strong yet. They're not experienced, especially Sadler at left tackle. He's played this year. He missed almost all of last year, not playing, but just being hurt and sick and stuff last year. Miller played a ton last year, but they're still young guys, and they don't have Joe Alt-Blake Fisher talent where they can overcome. Like Joe, if Joe made a mistake last year, he could overcome it because he's a freak. And so they're not. Colin Sadler's not that, and so I think the Notre Dame edge players are going to have a really good day, and I think Javonte Jean-Baptiste is a guy that has the best day of them all. I could see him being that guy that forces that clutch fumble on a strip sack or comes up with that big third down stop when Clemson tries to go off tackle and he just blows it up. I could see Javonte Jean-Baptiste being that guy, and being the big playmaker that Notre Dame needs in this game. So that's where I'm going with my game ball.
He deserves it, man. He's been playing really good football, but it hasn't necessarily gone to the box score as much as it should. So,
and that's it. I think this is the game where that happens, right? That's exactly where I'm coming from. Exactly. I think this is the game it happens. This is the game he gets the forced fumble or
a sack or two.
Whatever exactly. The biggest storyline coming out of this game is if it plays the way that I mentioned. Because when I say 24-13, that includes like Clemson being the last team to score. Just because I don't think it's going to be an ugly game. It's going to be a low scoring game based on my prediction, right? But it's not going to be the one where I think that Notre Dame necessarily is threatened to the point where you think they might actually lose. And so the biggest storyline for me is that this Notre Dame team can win big and win ugly. And it's not going to be like Duke. It's not going to be like Ohio State. It's not going to be like Louisville, right? And where they can kind of win ugly. It's going to be the storyline. And then it's just going to be, hey, look, Notre Dame, the biggest storyline to me is going to be the biggest picture is Notre Dame has now put Duke in the rear or put Clemson in the rearview mirror as a program. I mean, they're now the better program. And it's been settled on the field. And yes, Clemson's got championships and all that, but like there's nobody left on this team from those teams. There's nobody left on the roster from the championship teams. Sure. And for either team. And you've now won 3 of the last 4 against them. So it's you're now the better program. That's the biggest storyline for me coming out of the game if it plays out the way that I played out. Now, biggest concern, Notre Dame turns the ball over. That to me, that's the only Notre Dame turns the ball over, or B just doesn't it's another Stanford game, which I just don't see how that happens. I just don't see how that happens when you're playing Clemson. Defense just comes out. Al Golden puts together this unnecessarily aggressive game plan that results in big plays by Clemson and things like that. That's my big concern, but we haven't really seen him do that in a while. To be honest, we haven't seen him do that in any big games. Because here's the thing about Al Golden. For all of the things I've complained about him over the last couple of years, the reality is in these kind of games, the big moment games, his defenses have been great. Going back to last year,
Yep.
I mean, the only exception being the Clemson, the USC game where they were shorthanded. But even in that game, Ryan, the defense didn't play bad that game. And Caleb Williams is doing crazy stuff in that game. They're pressuring him. He's doing all types of wild stuff in that game, and they were playing shorthanded. Ohio State, they were great both years. Clemson, they were great last year. North Carolina, they were great until the game didn't matter anymore, and then Clemson got North Carolina some garbage touchdowns, like 42-17 at one point in time. I mean, in these big moments, the defense has been really good. And same this year. I mean, they got 3 losses right now if it's not for the defense, Ryan. Because they lose to Duke if it's not for the defense. Not just keeping Duke's point to 14 points, but you needed that last stop on third down to get the ball back to even have a chance to win the game, right? And so I just don't see Clemson being the week that happens. But if for some reason Al Golden decides he wants to do something, go away from what they've been doing, and the kids aren't locked in and don't show up, and the offense turns the ball over a bunch, yeah, Clemson could beat them then. I just don't think Clemson right now. They'd have to do something we have not seen them do all year to beat Notre Dame. But if Notre Dame's not locked in mentally, then that could happen. Because as we talked about earlier in the week, if Clemson plays their A game and Notre Dame plays their B or B+ game, Clemson can beat Notre Dame. I just don't think that's going to be Saturday. Because we just haven't seen Clemson come anywhere close to playing their A game, Ryan.
Not this year.
And Notre Dame's not Charleston Southern. I'll just kind of leave it at that. Now, can I answer I want to answer the last part too, Ryan. Okay. If Notre Dame hits on 3 of its 4 keys to victory, I think this game is a blowout. I think this game is going to look a lot like last year's score. But maybe Notre Dame scores a little bit more and Clemson scores a little bit less. Because I think, like 38-10, just because. I mean, so what's the one key they wouldn't hit on defense? Okay, so they get Klubnik out of sync. It's like there's just if they hit 3 out of 4 on both of those sides of the ball, I think that's going to result in Clemson turning the ball over a bunch. It's going to result in Clemson not being able to run the football. It's going to result in short fields for Notre Dame, and it's going to result in Notre Dame putting a lot of points on the board because the way Notre Dame is playing right now. We don't have a lot of faith in their offense, but their defense and special teams are giving them points.
Yep.
And Notre Dame had 252 yards of offense against USC, and USC scored 48. That's not a shot on the offense because I think they did what they needed to do. But the fact of the matter is the defense was doing that. I just think if Notre Dame plays its game, that this game won't be close. Just because I don't think Clemson's there yet, and I really think it could be a really convincing, like the score looks a lot like the 2020 ACC title game, where just, the 2018 Cotton Bowl, something like that, where it's a mismatch. I don't think that's going to happen because executing 3 of those 4 keys on both sides of the ball against this team is a lot harder to do because especially the Clemson defense. That's really what it comes down to.
Right.
I don't have a lot changing in that regard. What changes is the offense. If the offense finally steps up and is what we hope it can be, Ryan, this game will not be close. It will not be close. You nailed it, Ryan. I got to see it. I got to see it against a good team. That's a good defense. A good defense. That's what it comes down to. For me.
Yep, because we haven't really seen it against a really good defense yet. So hopefully that changes this weekend, but no guarantee that it will. And you're away against a really talented team in a stadium that brings a great home field advantage to the table. So it's going to be an interesting game. There's no doubt about that.
It is.
All right, well, that is our game predictions for Notre Dame heading down to take on the Clemson Tigers, 12 o'clock Eastern time on Saturday. 7-2 Notre Dame takes on 4-4 Clemson. We are going to get into a little bit of a mini mailbag here next. Before we do, though, you all, as our very esteemed Notre Dame fans, please hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, hit that notification bell. Make sure that if you are not, you should go to boards.irishbreakdown.com for all your latest recruiting and team intel. We will be, of course, live after the football game on Saturday for a little bit of a post-game show. So make sure that you are subscribed to the channel. 5-star reviews on any and all of your favorite podcast platforms. Thank you for joining this section of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. All right, mailbag questions. We got
yes,
some.
Sir. We have a few.
Right.
I did want to respond to something here. James Ingalls says, "Oh wow, 38-10. Heck of a prediction." That wasn't my prediction. My prediction was 24-13. I said if Notre Dame hits on all, like 3 of the 4 keys on both sides of the ball, I could see the game being like that. But I also don't understand why you think that's a heck of a prediction, because Notre Dame beat an undefeated Clemson team last year 35-14. Why would it be a crazy prediction to predict 38-10 this year? Like, I'm not going to do it because I don't think Notre Dame has shown me that they're that kind of offense just yet. But, let's not act like I just went out and said that's going. And I love you, James. You're a great poster. I just want to make sure people are clear that was not my prediction. That was if everything goes right, this is what the prediction could be. This is what the game could be. But it's not my prediction. That would be, to me, a complete I don't say not homer pick, because I'm not saying that, because I could see it happening, but it would be a pick that comes from it would be everything's going to go right for Notre Dame on the road at Clemson, and this is my score, right? They're capable of it. Certainly capable of it. They're also capable of losing. So I just want to make sure people are clear of what my prediction actually was. It was 24-13 was my prediction, right? So I just want to get everybody on the same page for that.
We had a super chat from Raymond Harton. What's up, Raymond? Go Irish, beat Clemson. Yes, sir. Appreciate you as always, my friends. Had a question from T-Guns. What's up, Tommy? Can you go over the playoff committee's criteria, how it should be prioritized, and how you think they're actually prioritizing it?
I think this year they were just making crap up, Ryan. Honestly,
I was gonna say, like, because I actually heard someone talk about this in a video where I actually thought they hit on a lot of key points. The criteria that they're trying to tell us, right? The entirety of a resume, the full resume, and the wins matter most, and all that type of stuff. It makes it look solid in certain spots as far as where you're placing teams. But then other teams, it's like, Ohio State, you're like, okay, cool, I get it. If that's your criteria, cool, I get it. But then you putting Michigan as high as you did, and Georgia, even Georgia. It's very inconsistent. I think everyone just wants consistency, man. Like, that's all it is, right? The only reason that we ever push back a ton on these rankings is because if you're set, you lay down the criteria and you follow it to a T. If you don't, then that's called inconsistency. And I think there's inconsistency in structurally how you have this ranking right now, which is why I think everyone's up in arms. What they should be.
And here's my other issue, Ryan. The inconsistency is specific to conferences. Like, there's this, the ACC's down this year. And I keep hearing that. And I said this in the show the other night. Based on what? Well, look at the good teams are losing to bad teams. Yes, but the league beat they won a lot of their games out of conference. They were much better out of conference than the SEC. You want to talk about Georgia is losing 14-3 at halftime against South Carolina, a team that North Carolina smacked from start to finish, right? So there's this assumption, well, the SEC is really good. Based on what? I got in a debate with a guy on Twitter. He's like, well, the SEC's won how many championships in a row? I said, first of all, that's a terrible argument. I said, so the 2 years that Clemson won a title in 16-18, are you going to tell me that the ACC was the best conference in college football in those years? No. They were terrible. In 2013, when Florida State won the national championship, I would argue the ACC was the worst Power 5 conference in college football. But the champion came from there, so that doesn't tell me anything, number one. Number two, what they did last year and the year before that and 10 years ago and 20 years ago didn't have anything to do with this season. In this season, the SEC is not the best conference, but they were treated as such in the polls or in the college football playoff rankings. Having having Tennessee ahead of Utah was absurd. Utah has 2 wins over top 20 teams. Tennessee has 0 top 25 wins. They have a common opponent that Utah beat by double digits, and that opponent, Florida, beat Tennessee by double digits, right? So it's like when you do things like that, and you say, well, Bill Bender said, but Utah looked bad last week. So it's supposed to be out the entirety of the season, right? Well, the entirety of the season, Utah's resume is way better than Tennessee's resume. Tennessee is closer to being not ranked than they should be ahead of Utah, in my opinion. And if you're going to say, well, it's about the resume and who you beat, then why is Florida State not ranked higher than Georgia and Michigan? Because their best win is a 20.1-point win over LSU. They also knocked Duke out of the top 25. So Michigan's best win is over Rutgers. Georgia's best win is over who? Kentucky? 2 unranked teams. So if you're going to tell me it's about the resume, then what you're saying by having Georgia and Michigan ahead is we care more about the fact that that Georgia and Michigan beat up on the crap teams, but Florida State barely beat Boston College. That's what we're going to talk about. That's what we're going to focus on. They barely beat Clemson. We don't care that they beat LSU by 21 points, which completely kills our SEC as great narrative. Right? They beat a team that you view as a top 14 team by 21 points on a neutral field. They're undefeated, and you're going to put them behind Georgia and Michigan, who have 0 combined wins over top 25 teams. Both teams have played opponents with losing records. Why is Washington behind them? Well, they played like crap against Arizona State. Okay, but they won, right? So if it's going to be about the resume, you're going to have letdown games when you have to play a good team. You know why Michigan doesn't have any letdown games? They haven't played anybody yet, right? Yeah. And so that's kind of my frustration. Why is Penn State ranked as high as they are? What's that built on? What win does Penn State have to justify them being ranked? Because if it's just going to be eye test, then guess what? Air Force should be ranked a lot higher because Air Force is smacking people this year. They haven't played anybody. Exactly. Yeah. If it's just, so you're now ranking those two teams because of what you think they were based on your eye test. Although I would argue if you're going to base it off the eye test, then Michigan should be ahead of Georgia because Michigan has been far more dominant than Georgia has this year against a schedule that has more teams with winning records than Georgia has faced. So if you're going to do that, Ryan, what's the justification for having Georgia number 2? They should be number 3 behind Michigan. Well, they're the defending champs. Then put them number 1. Right? I mean, so none of this has any consistency. Well, they're the defending champs and they're undefeated. Well, then put them number 1. Fine. Okay. At least I know. Like if they would have said, hey, my belief is they're the champs until somebody beats them, I'd have said, amen. That's why they're number 1 in my rankings. But they're not the best team. At least they don't have the best resume anyway. So don't talk to me about resume in one breath and then put Michigan and Georgia 2 and 3 in the other breath. Right? That's just, that's kind of where I'm at.
Just no consistency, man. 0.
That's my issue. None. Yeah. You're hyping up the Big Ten and the SEC, despite the fact that the on-field results should tell you that they should not be considered the way that they are. That's my beef with the top 25. Yeah. This is a traditional ranking. No, it won't matter. The teams. It does matter because if you're gonna have that bias now, you're gonna apply that bias in 2-3 weeks as well. You're just going to change which team is getting the benefit of the bias. That's my problem. The teams ought to work itself out. Not really. Because if you're going to have that bias against the Pac-12, who was the best team out of conference, by the way, the best not of the Power 5, they had the best out of conference record and record, big wins, all of it. And you're going to tell me that Utah is going to be ranked behind Tennessee. You're telling me that you have no understanding of how good the Pac-12 is this year. That's what you're telling me. That's what you're telling me, because you're gonna have them ranked ahead of Utah. Utah has played a team that Tennessee has played. Utah smacked them, and that team smacked Tennessee. Same record. Utah has more wins. You're telling me, yeah, but the SEC's better, and it's not. But that's what you're telling me. Because would you argue that the SEC this year is a better conference than the Pac-12? They may have the best team. I wouldn't.
No, I'm not.
Because I watched Washington State. Yeah, I watched Washington State go and beat the crap out of Wisconsin. I watched Washington outgain Michigan State by over 400 yards. Michigan outgained them by 280. What's the difference between those two games? Michigan punched a ball in the end zone with 10 seconds left. Washington took a knee at the 10. Washington took a knee with 10 seconds left at the 10-yard line. Could have punched it in just like Michigan and said, hey, we beat them by basically the same score you guys did. They had more points. They had a bigger lead at halftime. They outgained them by about 150, 160 more yards. But they had a bad game to Arizona State. But I thought it was about who they beat, right? I mean, so the whole thing is just horse crap, and that's my issue with it. It's just absolute easy inconsistency, and it's easy to see where that inconsistency is applied. We're going to apply resume to this conference, and we're not going to apply it to that conference. That's basically what it comes down to for me. So, yeah. And just so people are clear, for my ranking, you're the champs until somebody beats you. But based on the criteria that the College Football Playoff Committee uses, where it's only about this year, they should not be ranked number 1 or number 2, right? I mean, you got to beat some. Not when there's that many undefeated teams. Not when there's more than 4 undefeated teams, Ryan. That's my thing. Florida State, to me, deserves to be higher than Michigan and Georgia. But if you're going to tell me it's about what you say the criteria is, which is it's about who you beat. Now, there is some, how did you play against everybody? And I get all that. But shouldn't a win over LSU trump an ugly win over Boston College?
You would think. Yeah.
You'd think.
You would
but
think.
Apparently not.
We had a question from Michael S. Says Brian had 3 questions, $12 super chat in yesterday and not read. Question 1, compare Clemson's offensive line and defensive line to USC's. Question 2, Notre Dame's offensive line and defensive line to Clemson's. Question 3, opinion of decision-making of Hartman and Parker.
Number 1, Clemson has a better defensive line than USC's. They have a better offensive line than USC. Notre Dame has a better offensive line than Clemson. Defensive line wise, it's a much closer conversation. I would say I would give the advantage to Notre Dame when they're turned loose. The difference is Clemson always turns their D-line loose. Notre Dame doesn't. And I think that result, to me, I think Notre Dame's D-line has been more consistent and they've been more impactful in big moments. Clemson's defensive line is more disruptive. They produce more. That's it's very clear. I mean, they have like 2 guys with more tackles for loss than anybody that Notre Dame has on the D-line. So it's close. If you were to tell me, Ryan, that it's Clemson has a better D-line, I'm not going to argue with you. They're both very good. I'd give the edge to Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame's also a little bit more battle-tested. Up front, they've had to play some bigger moments and some better teams and some better lines and those type of things. But it's close. It's close. Yeah. But O-line's not close. Notre Dame's, even though they haven't been great, they're still better than Clemson's offensive line.
I would agree. I would give the Clemson USC one. I would say that offensive line is a push. I mean, you could sell me either way. I'm not like adamant on either one of those side of things. I think that USC has a couple players up front that I kind of like a little bit offensive line wise. Same thing with Clemson, but regardless, I think they're both below average units. So that's a push for me. Defensive line, it's Clemson, and I don't think it's particularly close. I mean, interior, I guess a little bit of a conversation, but not really.
From Notre Dame talent standpoint, not from a right. I mean, if you're looking at from an NFL draft standpoint, right, I think that's where you could have a conversation. Would you say that's fair?
Oh, I don't even know about that. I think Clemson's.
No, I'm saying because you've got Bear, you've got some young guys, Anthony Lucas, some young guys with some talent if they can put it all together, but they don't play anywhere close to the way the Clemson kids do.
Oh yeah,
right?
No doubt.
I mean,
no doubt.
Yeah.
Notre Dame offensive line, I definitely give them the advantage there. I would take Clemson's defensive line from the production perspective, and they just have a little bit more names, in my opinion, so a little bit more depth potentially. So, yep.
And then number 3, decision making of Hartman and Parker. I mean, I'm.
What do we mean by Parker decision making as far as how he's calling a football game?
I mean, it's like making the decisions he did on the final drive against Ohio State. That I had an issue with that. I think the play calling for the most part has been fine, pretty good the last 2 weeks. I no problem with it. It's just it's not always being executed correctly. And Hartman, I mean, look, Hartman made a couple bad decisions on Saturday. The second interception was a bad decision. The first interception, that was the right throw, the right arms, that was the right trajectory, the right speed, freshman kid made a mistake. It happens, right? The second one was bad. You don't force that ball. That was just, you predetermined you're going to force that ball. He took a sack. He should have thrown it away. So early on, he made some decisions that I didn't like. He settled in and played well. His decision-making has been good this year. I wouldn't call it great. I think part of it comes down to not always having the most confidence with the receivers, not being on the field with those receivers. It's hard to build confidence when you're a first-year quarterback at a place when for a month you're barely on the field with the guys you have to throw the ball to because they're all dealing with hamstring injuries.
Right.
So,
yeah, I actually think that Hartman's biggest problem as a decision maker is the chances he chooses not to take, to be honest, at times.
There you go.
I don't think it's always the decisions he does make. So,
Yep.
yeah, it's
Yep.
been inconsistent. There's no doubt.
Because I think you could say 2 of his interceptions this year had as much to do with the wide receivers that did him.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
I think both the interceptions on the balls to Rico, like a more veteran receiver doesn't allow those balls to get picked off. I mean, it just,
Sure.
I think you nailed it, Ryan. It's the not taking the shots that he needs to take. 3rd and 6 against USC, second drive. Got Rico running on the cross. He just zeroed in on Rico. He wasn't willing to take that shot to Jaden Greathouse down the field. I put on the board, I broke it down where there's 4 or 5 plays against Ohio State where if he goes to Chris Tyree, that is a big play, potential big play. Didn't take those shots. He took a couple of them against Pitt. So hopefully that continues.
That's a part of decision making. Everyone thinks it's the bad decisions you make. It's also decisions that you choose not to make. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Had a question from Pete Weber. What's up, Pete? What does Vegas see know that justifies the spread, especially with Will Shipley most likely out? What's it like? It's still Clemson 3-point underdog. Is that still where it's at?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's been back and forth between 2.5 and 3. I'll go see what the latest one is, at least for the one that ESPN uses. So let me just look at that real quick. It is 3 right now. Over-unders of 44.5.
I mean, Pete, I think that you're playing into 2 good defenses. You're also playing into Notre Dame is going into a hostile environment, a place that Clemson usually plays very well at, and that brings a really good home field advantage, right? So I think that's why the score is a little bit lower. I guessed, my buddy actually texted me and asked me what I thought the spread was going to be before it opens, and I was like, 5.5, maybe 6 as far as Notre Dame favored, but they kept it lower at 3 because I think that they're counting on Clemson being a little bit desperate. I think they're counting on the home field advantage kicking in, and Notre Dame and Clemson is a defensive football game, at least on the surface level. So I think that's kind of what Vegas is playing into.
I think location matters a lot. I mean, look, last 3 years, Clemson hasn't been as good as they've been in the past, right? So I could give you some stat, like going back to 2017, Clemson hasn't lost at home. They've only lost home X number of times, but they're not the team they were from 17 to 20. So let's just grant that. So let's just look at the last 3 years and they haven't been as good. Clemson lost 3 games in 2021. They lost 3 games last season, and they've lost 4 games this season. So they've lost 10 games. Only 2 of those losses were at home. One was an overtime loss against a top 5 team that's been better than Notre Dame this year. And they needed overtime and a missed field goal to even come back and win that game. And the other one was a 1-point loss last year to a red-hot South Carolina team in a game that Clemson blew a big lead. So that makes total sense. I mean, they don't lose very often at home, even in the 3 down years, because they're 4-4 this year. Like I said, they lost at Miami, at NC State, and at Duke. They're a different team on the road. They're a much more competitive team at home. And so I'm okay with the line. I mean, and Ryan, you and I have them covering, but I think we're both afraid that it could be a field goal game. I mean, you talked about it. It could be a game like that. So I'm okay with the line being what it was. I mean, Notre Dame's 6-2, Clemson's 4-4, but the fact of the matter is you've got to look at where Clemson's losing games, and the fact is Notre Dame's last 2 games on the road, they lost, one by 13, and the other one they needed a 4th and 16 to have a chance to come back and win that one. So that's exactly where the spread comes from. Notre Dame has to prove that they can go on the road and win this kind of game. You and I talked about this on Tuesday, Ryan. So I think that's what factors into it is those 2 things right there. And I'm comfortable with it. I don't think that's something that should scare people. I think it makes total sense to me.
Yeah, I agree. DM ND13, what's up, Dan? If University of Michigan loses scholarships, do they have to rescind offers to guys already committed, or would they not be able to bring back 5th or 6th years? What would normally happen? It's a great question. I'm actually not sure.
Yeah, it's a combination of both, I believe, but it would primarily impact their recruiting class because usually scholarship offers or scholarship losses usually also come from caps being put on your recruiting classes, don't they? I believe they do. So I don't know where Michigan is right now, and as far as the size of their class, I'll look that up here real quick. But I would assume that they would have to drop some kids from there, because remember one of the things that was coming out earlier in the year, Ryan, was that Jim Harbaugh was doing this thing with walk-ons and all this other stuff with NILs and walk-ons, and where they were trying to basically fudge that system, fudge the game there. And so I think it would result in them having it, because they're at 25 commitments right now. I think Michigan would have a tough time having a roster of 85 of less than 85 with 25 kids coming in.
Makes sense.
And I highly doubt Jim Harbaugh is just going to ask a bunch of fifth-year seniors not to come back, because he still wants to win if he's employed as the coach. I mean, if they lose scholarships and get put on probation, you'd think Jim Harbaugh wouldn't be the coach. But Ryan, you and I talked about how it was smart that Michigan rescinded, is not going to negotiate. And then we find out 2 days later that they're speeding up the process. So what are you thinking? So
I'm not sure anybody over there is thinking.
It's going to be weird. It's going to be very, very weird. I'm very curious how it's going to pan out.
Yep. We are not Marshall. Brian, how does this staff make sure their kids don't come out flat for a noon kickoff on the road in a tough environment against a wounded but good opponents?
I think everything you just said is why they won't come out flat. I mean, look, Ryan, look, the only way a coaching staff can get a team to come out flat is if they intentionally tap down their team. That was my issue with Brian Kelly. He fought to tamp down emotion. He wanted it to be businesslike. Marcus Freeman doesn't really run his program that way. So I don't know that. I'm not really worried about Notre Dame coming out flat, because here's what happens, Ryan. When you come out and you don't execute, people say, oh, they're flat. No, they're not flat. Like NC State. Oh, they come out flat. No, they didn't come out flat. NC State came out flying. Right? They weren't flat. They were just not executing. Once they started executing, they rolled. And coming out flat's what happened against Louisville. That was flat on offense anyway. Coming out flat is what we saw against Stanford last year. Not what we saw against Marshall. They didn't come out flat against Marshall. They just weren't executing. They're making bad mistakes, turning guys loose. So they may not execute well against Clemson. That's a different deal. I have zero thought of Notre Dame coming out flat. I'll be shocked if Notre Dame comes out flat, because at the end of the day, Ryan, unless you're tamping down emotion, that stuff takes care of itself. Right. I mean, it's Clemson. Like these kids grew up in an era where Clemson and Bama and Georgia were the dominant teams of college football. Yeah. Like, they've gone against these kids. They know who these kids are. They know these 5-star kids. They've gone again at camps against these kids that they're going to be facing. They know these kids can play. I'll be shocked if this Notre Dame team, if they didn't come out flat last week, they're not going to come out flat this week. If I was worried about them coming out flat, Ryan, it would have been against Pitt last week, who stinks. They came out guns blazing last week on both sides of the ball, really. I mean, they had the turnovers, but they were moving the ball up and down the field on Pitt. They just kept turning the ball over. It wasn't about being flat. I'd be shocked. I mean, very shocked.
I talked about this in the extra recruiting show, and you kind of hit on it there a little bit, is that these players on this Notre Dame roster, all they've ever known is Clemson being a really good football team. That's all they've ever known. They think back to their childhood and growing up, and they remember Deshaun Watson. They probably remember a little bit of Taj Boyd. They remember Trevor Lawrence. They remember those guys and those teams, and that's kind of their memories. And I don't think a record is what makes you take a team lightly all the time. I think it's the brand, right? It's Duke. It's coming out against Louisville. Like those, I think it was more about, because they came out flat against both those teams who were both undefeated at the time, right? Like it wasn't like it was like a record issue against Duke or Louisville. You came out flat because I think you were like, oh, it's just Duke. It's just Louisville in the back of your minds, right? I mean, You're not going to do that against Clemson. Clemson could be 0-8 at this point. You're still going to reminisce about Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence and all the great teams they had, the Travis Etiennes of the world. You're going to remember all those guys. So I wouldn't be surprised if Notre Dame came out flat. I would be shocked if they came out flat against a Clemson team. Not that if they lose, that's different. But if they come out flat and they just don't have any energy, I would be very surprised about that.
And the Duke and Louisville games, to me also, Ryan, on top of them not being brands, it's still hangover. I still believe it was hangover from the Ohio State game, especially against Duke. And we'll see how it goes. But that would just shock me. Absolutely shock me.
Andre Tonsel says, what percentage do you believe they need to win the game, win this game? 80%, 90%, and what side of the ball will that be on, the offense or defense or combination of both? To win this game. I mean, Andre, I think you have to win this football game because, again, we talk about getting to 10 wins. We talk about fighting potentially for a New Year's Six Bowl bid. I mean, because I think that there's an interrelated question. I think Tyler Evans asked a question about like who needs this game more, right? Like
Yes, the super chat right here. Who has more to
yes,
lose, Notre Dame or Clemson, and why?
I think Clemson has more to lose because 4-5, you're like, dang, man, you have been a playoff contender, an ACC champ, and now you're fighting to even make a bowl game. Like, that's ugly, right? 7-3 is not good, but like, I mean, if you're Notre Dame, you can still fight back to 9-3 and still win a bowl game and still have a 10-win season, right? Like, you can still have some good come out of the season. And obviously, it's still a disappointment, but
Yes.
is it a bigger disappointment than being 4-5 and the best that you can go is 7-5 in the regular season and hopefully make a bowl game? Like I don't know.
Well, if Notre Dame loses this game, it means the season was a disappointment. If Clemson loses this game, the season's a disaster. I mean, 8-4 is going to be bad enough. But if they go 8-4 and win their last 4 games and then go win a bowl game, you know, they'll feel a lot like Notre Dame did last year. You can say, "Hey, look, we had some tough times." Because here's the spin that you have, and it's not. I shouldn't even say spin, right? Because it's true. Look, yeah, we started off 4-4. We bounced back and we beat Notre Dame. And guys, that's a really good football team. And they would be correct. Notre Dame is a good football team. And then we bounced back and we went and beat Georgia Tech. And then we beat North Carolina, who's also a top 25 football team. And then we went on the road and beat our rival. Guys, look, here's why we lost. Okay. We lost in overtime to Florida State. We lost, who was a top 5 team. We lost in overtime to Miami. We lost, to Duke when we had a chance to take a lead. We beat ourselves in 4 games. And there's some truth to that. And so they'll rally and be okay. If they lose to Notre Dame, it's like, no, we're just not very good, right? And some major changes are needed. I think changes are needed anyway. But I honestly believe, as I said, if Notre Dame wins this game, like the Clemson dynasty's on life support right now. Like, I think Dabo's going to turn this thing around and Clemson's going to be good again. But I think Clemson's going to get back to being good like they were, with Charlie Whitehurst and Taj Boyd and those kind of teams, not like they were with Deshaun and Trevor.
Charlie Whitehurst, man. That was clipboard Jesus, Charlie Whitehurst.
Yeah.
Clipboard Jesus.
He was decent in college. And then who was before Taj? It wasn't Charlie Whitehurst, was it? Who was before Taj? Let me find it here real quick.
What was that guy's name? I know exactly who it was too.
Kyle Parker. Yeah, it's Kyle Parker. That's who it was. Yeah, the baseball player.
Yeah.
So, it'll be that they'll 10-3, 11-2 consistently. Maybe occasionally make a playoff run, but they won't be the dynasty they were. I think that's pretty much dead. But if they can somehow beat Notre Dame, then they can keep on life support. And if Notre Dame beats them, then I think Notre Dame pulls the plug. And Clemson will be good again, but they will never be what they were. And Notre Dame will put them in the rearview mirror.
Very fair. We had a question from Ronaldo is a GOAT. Your thoughts on the running back from Oklahoma State, Ollie Gordon, and do you think they can find success with running the ball against Oklahoma this weekend?
Well, Ryan, we talked a lot about him on Tuesday, and I talked about him yesterday. Yeah. So we've definitely had a chance to talk about him. Do me a favor, Ryan, when you answer this question, go backwards. Talk about them playing against Oklahoma. And then why his style and what you think of him gives them a chance. You know what I mean? So, like,
okay. Yeah.
Because I think his style of play is going to determine a big part of why he'll have success against Oklahoma.
Well, I think that you saw Oklahoma with a little bit of blemishes last week against Kansas, obviously. Kansas was able to run the football pretty well against them. I mean, Devin Neal and the Henshaw kid, the backup, they had some success, especially early on in that football game, which I think loosened up the Oklahoma defense that has been a lot better. But it's also been a team that I think you were just kind of waiting for a little bit of that game. That's a little bit of a setback game. And I think that's what Kansas was. Ollie Gordon, 6'1", 215 pounds, pretty explosive kid, can create some big runs, pretty physical, breaks a lot of tackles. I mean, he's just a really good all-around back. And Oklahoma's in a tough situation this week for stopping the run because their starting middle linebacker, Danny Stutzman, is out for this football game as well, which is not a good recipe for stopping a player that has run for over 500 yards the last 2 football games that he has played in. Ollie Gordon is the hottest runner in all of college football right now. So, yes, I think that they have an opportunity to run the football well against Oklahoma. Will it be enough? Will Oklahoma State defense be able to make enough stops against a pretty good Oklahoma offense? That's the question I have. I think that Oklahoma can potentially throw the ball pretty well against Oklahoma State's defense, but I think that it's going to be a close game. I actually do have Oklahoma State pulling out the game and winning in a little bit of a shootout, winning a close football game, and I think that Ollie Gordon could be a big part of that game.
When you watch them play, Ryan, and you have to give some credit to the Oklahoma State offensive line too. Like when I was watching the Cincinnati game, he had like 3 huge runs where he didn't get touched. Part of that is he's like, you talk about a running back being hot. What does a running back being hot mean? Well, a lot of times it means he's making all the right reads. He's making his timing is just, it's like you're in a zone, man. You just see it before it happens. You anticipate it. You hit it. It's like any other sport, man. It's just like everything I do, I'm right. I throw up this crazy shot in basketball. Like, dude, what are you doing? And boom, it goes in, right? Like, I mean, just everything you do is just, it works. But he's hitting all the holes, and he had some really impressive runs against Cincinnati where he was like breaking tackles at the line of scrimmage and bouncing off guys. But there was like 3-4 big runs where he just uncut. Right? He had that one cut where they like washed Cincinnati all the way down. He just cuts behind it, man. And there's just, I mean, it's just, he's got to see it, and the timing's great. He can be patient when he needs to be. He can get downhill quickly when he needs to be. It's been fun kind of, because I didn't know a lot about him until the last month, Ryan. I really had no clue. If you'd asked me who Ollie Gordon was before the season started, I'd be like, I have no idea.
He was sharing the ball earlier in the year. They had like Elijah Collins, who's the Michigan State kid that transferred over to Oklahoma State a little bit. And I mean, the great thing about what Ollie Gordon's doing is that they're doing it with a very below average passing attack as well, which is like, how the heck are they able to sustain this? But it has been the last few games. So last like 4 games, he's been running the ball really well.
Yeah, and they're doing a great job of mixing up their runs. They'll go downhill out of 12 personnel. They'll go off tackle out of 12 personnel. They'll spread the field, go 11 and 10 personnel and run them that way. They do a lot of different things. They'll get downhill quickly. They'll run counters. They'll run stretches. Like, they do a really nice job of mixing it up, and he is able to run them all. I mean, he's able to hit them all. Yes. And, when I first heard about him, I was expecting this kid to be like this, like the typical Texas, Oklahoma State guy, like 5'11", slasher, just running a million stretch plays and just finding holes. But like, no, they're like running counter and hammering people. Like, they're running inside zone and just I mean, so he's a really good, he's playing at a very high level right now, very high level. Yep. And his patience is because I've just popped up a highlight tape again. We're watching, and just to kind of refresh my memory, but like, he had that one, his like 3rd or 4th long touchdown run. He just kind of waits, lets his blocking set up, and then just creases it. Very patient runner. But Oklahoma State, it's kind of wild. They have produced some absolute dudes at running back the last 40 years. I mean, they really have. I mean, we all know Thurman Thomas and Barry Sanders, but like even the last 10, 15 years, it's like every year. It's like Joseph Randall. It's like every other year there's some new running back that I've never heard of at Oklahoma State that's turned into a really good football player, man. Yeah. It's like all these guys you just have never heard of, and you're like, who the heck is this guy, and where did he come from? It's like, and Jalen Warren a couple years ago goes for 1,200 yards. Chuba had 200 to over 2,000 yards. Justice Hill had 1,400 yards. Back-to-back, 1,000-yard seasons. I mean, they just Joseph Randall, they just Kendall Hunter, they just like, where do they find these guys? Keith Toston had 1,200 yards for Oklahoma State, man. Like, they just produce a lot of these kids that put up yards, man. Have any of those guys done anything in the NFL?
I was going to say the best one was probably the least productive of the Oklahoma State backs was actually Chris Carson, that played with the Seahawks, was a really good player in the NFL, and he was kind of like an injury plagued running back while he was at Oklahoma State. So I
remember them always waiting for him to break out, and he never did.
Yeah, and then he broke out in the NFL, and he had a very good career before he got injured. So. We have Carnell Humphrey, who says, if Notre Dame shows up like they did versus USC, why would that not be the score? USC is definitely better than Clemson.
This was a comment regarding the 38-10 conversation. And James followed up and said that he was responding to a prediction somebody else made. So that fair. Appreciate that. it's one thing to say that it can happen, and it's another thing to say to predict that it will. Right? Like I didn't predict Notre Dame to beat USC 48-20. Yeah. I did say before the game, if A, B, C, and D happens, that Notre Dame could blow them out. But there was no way I was going to predict that based on what, right? And so to me, to predict that Notre Dame wins 35-14 again or 38-10 or whatever would require me to say the offense is going to do something. I know it. They're going to do something we have not seen them do all year against a good defense, right? I can't do that. Is it possible? Sure. They were also capable of putting up 27-30 on Ohio State. Didn't do it.
Right. Yep.
Right. And that's the thing is I got to see it. They were capable of putting 28-31 up on Duke. Didn't do it.
Yeah. Also, USC is definitely better than Clemson offensively, for sure. Defensively, It's not even a conversation. I mean, it's not even a conversation. Right. So, yeah.
Light years away. Years away. Because again, I mean, we talk about how good the Notre Dame defense has been. Any metric, any computer model, they're all going to have Notre Dame and Clemson in almost the same area. You know, like I said earlier, Ryan, I don't know if you were still on the show at the time, but you know, FEI, Notre Dame 9th, Clemson 10th for Mo Efficiency Index. You know, you look at a lot of these different metrics, they're both top 10 defenses, and Notre Dame's defense hasn't shown that they can, or Notre Dame's offense hasn't shown that they can score on that kind of defense because they couldn't do it on their own defense. That was one of the things we talked about during fall camp was, you know, they were having trouble moving the ball on their own defense. And part of that we said was because this defense is pretty good, but, you know, I mean, that's the truth though. I mean, right now they're just not that team right now. I'm actually looking up what the efficiencies for the ESPN's actually are kind of funny. I haven't seen those. I'm curious where they have them. Of course, ESPN has Notre Dame 14th on defensive efficiency behind Nebraska, Troy, Utah. That's pretty funny.
Chuck in the chat just said, we just going to ignore like Willie Korn didn't exist. Shaking my head. You remember Willie Korn?
Willie Korn, yeah, he was their backup quarterback for his last 2 years. Like he only played like 1 year. So, and that was that even when Dabo was the coach?
Probably not.
I mean, that was because
maybe just the early beginning, maybe.
Yeah, Willie Korn was the backup to Kyle Parker in 2010 and 2009.
Okay, so it was there then. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know that Willie Korn never threw for more than 216 yards in a season. So he was never their guy. He was never their starter.
I forgot about that name.
He was very highly ranked.
I was about to say he's a big recruit. Yeah, he's a big recruit.
Yeah, he was very highly ranked. But Willie Korn. He's an offensive coordinator now. See at Liberty, I think. Yeah. All right, here's the next one.
T Smith 0323. What's up, T Smith? What teams do you think need to go to the portal next season for a quarterback away from getting their offense rolling?
Oh man, I'd have to. Yeah. I mean, USC is going to have to go to the portal next year. I mean, at a lot of positions, I think this might be the first time they don't have to go at quarterback unless they don't think Malachi Nelson can be that guy.
Maybe Oregon.
I'm trying to
losing Bo Nix.
Yeah.
Maybe they go back.
Well, they got a couple talented young kids. Maybe they might want to turn to that. See, that's going to be the interesting thing, Ryan, because we still don't know where a lot of these teams are in regard to this win. Like that's why I respect. This is why Kirby Smart's different than other schools. Kirby Smart could have easily gone to the portal for Sam Hartman or one of these guys that was a more proven guy and said, hey, we're Carson we like, but we're trying to win a championship. We're going to go to the portal for a proven player. And he said, no, we're going to develop our kid. And they went through their bumps in the road early in the season, but now that offense is playing at a very high level. Why? Because they developed the kid. They gave him the chance to play. So, I think Bama might have to do that, though. I mean, unless they think that Dylan Lonergan can be ready. I mean, their quarterback situation is a mess right now, in my opinion.
Washington, Michael Penix leaves, and you're back to Dylan Morris again. I mean,
yeah, and they have a freshman that was highly ranked, but I don't know a lot about him. I never saw him play, and I don't,
Florida State, Jalen Travis leaves, and then you have Tate Rodemaker. I don't know if that's a guy you want to roll with. I don't know.
You got the kid that you signed as a true freshman. Again, do you really want to turn it over to it? I mean, I don't know. That's the they're both in the same situation I think Notre Dame was in this year, where they had a talented freshman, but do you really want to turn it over to a redshirt freshman or you know what I mean, that kind of thing. I don't know the answer to that. So, Ohio State doesn't need to. Penn State doesn't need to. Michigan maybe. I don't know who Michigan's next
Funny
quarterback
enough,
is.
my one friend who is an Ohio State fan actually wants them to go to the portal for a quarterback this offseason. He's not a Kyle McCord fan, but
It's funny. I was watching ESPN the other day, and they're like, Ohio State's not the best team in the country, but they have the best resume. And I'm saying, like, the issue, and I said this in the show the other night, the issue is that Ohio State's winning differently than they have in the past. It's not that they're not still really good. And because they don't score like they used to score, I mean, Ohio State's only scoring 32.5 points per game. Well, part of it is because they've played two really good defensive football teams. And I would argue three, because Wisconsin's playing better defensively. But they're not in the same league as Ohio State and Penn State. But their average margin of victory right now, their average, like their separation between what they're scoring and what they're giving up right now is 22.5 points per game. Last year, it was 23.2 points per game. The difference was it was sexier last year because they scored points. But they're every bit as dominant this year as they were last year as far as the margin of victory in their games. And so they're just winning different, and people are having a hard time adapting to that. They're winning with defense again, which is why I think they're a more dangerous team. But they are going to have to get their offense is going to have to, if they want to win a championship, their offense is going to have to be better than it's been the last month. I will say that.
Sure. Yeah, Joe Allen, who would you rather Notre Dame play in a New Year's Six, Alabama or LSU? I'd personally be good with either one, Joe. I mean, I guess Alabama slightly because they have the state power of being national champions multiple times over the last X amount of years, but I'd be fine with LSU. I mean, beating an SEC team is honestly one thing that I would like to see in the bowl season, hopefully.
If you beat either team, it's good for both. It's good no matter what. To me, I'd much rather play Bama. You've already beaten LSU a couple times in bowl games. LSU's a great program. I don't think it moves the needle the same way that beating Alabama does. It just doesn't. And Alabama's a team you haven't beaten. So if you beat LSU, it's like, yeah, well, we beat the coach none of us wanted, and we've already done that. We beat LSU twice in bowl games. It matters, but it doesn't move the needle like it beating Bama, in my opinion. Because we talk about like slaying dragons, right, Ryan? We talked about like 2012, slaying that dragon against Stanford, and Ohio State needs to be that kind of team. Well, Bama's one of those teams that is okay, now you've beat a team that you haven't been able to beat before. Georgia's that kind of team. And so if I had my choice, it would be Alabama. And I like the matchup better too, to be completely honest with you. I think Notre Dame can beat either team. I think Notre Dame can absolutely score on LSU, like a lot. And I think Notre Dame has proven they can play an offense like LSU's and keep it in check. And I think LSU has similar problems to what USC has, Ryan, which is if you can beat them up front, then you have a chance to slow them down. And that's what Florida State did in the second half. Well, Ole Miss doesn't have a front that necessarily did that in that game. Notre Dame does. Now, doing it is much easier said than done. But I think Notre Dame can score on them, and they'd have a tougher time scoring on Bama. But I think Bama would have an even tougher time scoring on Notre Dame. So they both present interesting matchups and intriguing matchups. I think the game would play out much differently depending on who they play. I think it would be a much higher scoring game. But here's the other thing too: I have no clue who's going to play for either team in either one of those games. That's the other part of it. It's like I have no clue who's going to play for LSU. I have no clue who's going to play for Bama, and I have no clue who's going to play for Notre Dame.
I would think Bama be a more like full team than LSU because like if I'm Jaden Daniels, I'm not sure I would play in that football game. If I'm Malik Neighbors, I'm not sure I would play in that football game. I mean, but Alabama, it's like, yeah,
does
Jalen
Kool-Aid
Milroe,
play?
You're playing.
Yeah. Like I don't. But see, here's the thing: Bama's did. Here's what I want to know about Bama this year. Did what Bryce and Will Anderson do last year set a tone for future years? Hey, you play on this team, you see it through. That's because like they were both. Everybody knew they were going to be top 5 picks. It's not like they were top 5 picks because of what they did to Kansas State. They said, we have a mission and we're trying to finish that. We're trying to finish this journey. And look what happened. Sure. They were number 1 in, what were they? 1 and 3, 1 and 4 in the draft. Where'd Will go? He 3 or 4.
He was 3, I think. He was
3.
Yeah.
So in 1 and 3, it didn't hurt him. I said, well, Matt, who was it? Matt Corral that got hurt a couple years ago in the bowl game when he decided to play. Was it? I think he was the one.
I think he did.
So, I mean, I get it. But I don't know if that set a precedent at Bama or if that was just those two kids were unique. I don't know the answer to that. But
I think there's more. Like, I think LSU has a couple players that would drastically change the game more if they chose not to play than what Alabama has. Like, if Jaden
so
Daniels
you're
doesn't play,
saying
it's like,
so what you're saying is like if Kool-Aid doesn't play, Bama's still going to put a pretty good secondary on the field.
right?
Where
They'll
if
still have
Malik
Tyrion
Neighbors
Arnold and whoever they have.
right,
Yep.
and they've got young kids. Whereas if Jaden Daniels doesn't play and
Malik
Malik Neighbors doesn't play,
yeah. Or Brian Thomas might not even play too, man. He's going to go high in the draft. People don't even realize that. The other wide receiver, he's going to go high.
that would be an interesting predicament for LSU. Yes. Very interesting predicament. All right. Last couple here before we get out of here, Ryan.
Okay. Ray Holcraft with the question, with all the Sam Hartman's experience, why does he seem to not have take the shots downfield on a more regular basis? Is this a lack of confidence issue with Hartman? I think it's definitely part of it. Yeah, I think that.
Yeah, not in himself. Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, when you're at Wake Forest, you have guys like A.T. Perry, Donovan Green that you've grown with, that you have more confidence in than making those plays. The one tough part about being a one-year transfer is you're still developing a rapport and chemistry with guys. And I think that takes time, man. Like, I don't think this is just a few practices, a few games, and then you all of a sudden click. I mean, you have to remember, like, he was with A.T. Perry for 4+ years. I mean, like, he knew him inside and out. I mean, that matters. That absolutely matters.
To your point, Ryan, if A.T. Perry went through a month last year where he wasn't practicing much, would not affect him and Sam Hartman's relationship one bit. Because as you said, they've been together for 4 years. Whereas if Jalen Greathouse goes a month without practicing, that impacts their relationship because they don't have that rapport. And that's part of it. And then of course there's been plenty of deep balls that Sam threw this year that didn't get caught. Jaden Thomas drops a deep ball against NC State. Tobias Merriweather drops a deep ball against Duke, and Sam overthrows him on another one. And Rico Flores doesn't make a play on the ball against Louisville. It gets picked off. After a while, that keeps happening. You're like, I don't know that I want to keep throwing that ball there. I know what happens. I'm going to throw it anywhere in Mitchell Evans' region, and he's going to make a chance. Because, like, you know, we talk about taking chances down the field, but, you know, I would argue that the ball he threw to Mitchell Evans over the middle was a far more dangerous throw than taking a one-on-one shot outside. If Mitchell doesn't catch that ball, Ryan, there's a safety standing right back there ready to pick off a tipped ball. Yeah. Right. But he just was like, dude, I know Mitchell's going to go get this ball. I mean, it's confidence in those guys. And honestly, they really haven't given him a reason to have that confidence yet. But at some point in time, he's got to be that you're the leader, man. You can't make the catch. You still got to make the throw. You got to give them a chance. And hopefully, you know, Tobias making that play and Tyree making that great catch last week. Hopefully those are things that kind of, you know, give Sam a little bit more confidence, because he's hit last game and a half, Ryan, he's hit really 2 games. I mean, he hit Rico on a deep ball against USC. He hit Chris Tyree on a deep ball against USC. He hit 2 deep balls last week, one to Tyree, one to Merriweather. So, you know, it's starting to pick back up. Hopefully it continues against Clemson. But doing that against Clemson is going to be a lot tougher than doing that against Pitt and doing that against USC. So a little bit tougher.
We have the next question from Ryan. Great name, by the way. How does putting mics in the helmets of quarterbacks in college change the game and the preparation that goes into each week?
Well, it doesn't really change the preparation a whole lot for the quarterback, because he's just means instead of getting the signal from the sideline, he's going to get it from the field. Here's the thing, though. If you're going to be like, there's this push. People say, well, this is why you need to put microphones in the helmet of the quarterback. Well, if you're a tempo team, that doesn't really help a ton, Ryan, because you still have to get the call to the receivers somehow, whether it's coming from the quarterback or it's coming from the sideline. So is the quarterback going to then walk over to every receiver and tell them what the play call is, or is he going to be giving signals of this is what the play is? Right. I mean, so there's still going to be some level of that. There's still going to be some level of, we have calls that we are telling the offensive line to tell you which protection that it's going to go. What I think you'll see is if you see more team, like, to me, it'll impact Notre Dame a lot more than it would, like, I mean, it would impact teams like, opposite. It would impact teams like Oregon more than it would impact Notre Dame, because Notre Dame I think it benefits Notre Dame. They just keep doing what they're doing. They just don't signal in. They're a team that huddles. They huddle a lot.
Yeah.
So now it's just you're still getting a play call in. Well, now it's just coming here instead of being signaled in. For Oregon, their whole operation would change because they still like to push the tempo, or any team that wants to go tempo, because now you got to get into the quarterback. Now your focus is how does the quarterback direct? Because right now the way it works, Ryan, is you've got different signalers. Some of them, like some teams will do it just where there's one guy making all the calls and then there's dummy signalers. But for other teams, one signaler is calling the play. The other signaler is like telling the formation. The other one, or it could be one signaler is for the offensive line. One is for the receivers. Every team does it differently. So how are you going to get that information to the skill players and to the receivers if you're not huddling? There's still going to be some type of signaling that has to happen. And so what this actually does to me is puts more on the shoulders of the quarterback. Now, the good news is the coach can be telling him exactly what signal to people. Okay, fine. But in the NFL, that shuts off after like 15 seconds? Right? What's the time
I
it
think
shuts off?
it's 15 or 20 seconds left in the game clock. It turns off. I think that's why a lot of more NFL teams have gone like no huddle and just get up to the line so that you can see what's happening. And then there's an audible that you need to make. Let's make that happen now, type of thing. So,
and NFL quarterbacks are more prepared to do that, where that's a lot more of a burden. If you got a redshirt freshman, if you got Sam Hartman, you can get away with that. If you got Bo Nix, you can get away with. You got veteran quarterbacks, but what if the next year you're starting a redshirt freshman? That's putting a lot on his shoulders. You're still going to need signaling. So what they need to do, if you want to eliminate this, what you need to do is hammer Michigan and prevent this from. Now, I'm still a fan of put microphones in the helmets. I'm all for that, but there's still going to be some signaling that needs to happen. It just is different. It's a different type of thing now.
I think a lot of teams might still keep signaling. They'll signal in the play, try to get it in super fast and get them up to the line of scrimmage. The one thing that was happening with the Rams for a couple years there was when Jared Goff was really good for them, is that they would basically spend the time, get up quick, and then Sean McVay would tell Jared Goff, like, hey, you're going here on this play, like go there on this look. And then that was kind of, so it actually made it easier, I guess, for him in that situation. But obviously every situation is not going to be the same.
Sure. That's funny. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. Literally they were like, we might need to make this less of a time that you're allowed to be on the clock, because Sean McVay is just telling him like, hey, you're seeing this coverage, go here on this play. That's where you're going to need to go. So that's Cobras Only with the super chat. Thank you so much. Do you think the bye week will hurt Notre Dame in the playoff ranking? If teams in front of them lose, they will move up or stay idle, in your opinion?
No, I mean, basically saying like Notre Dame has a bye week next week, if they don't play
from here.
Yeah.
I mean, it shouldn't hurt you at all, because it's supposed to be out the entirety of a resume, right? So like at the end of it, it's like 12 games is 12 games, but it probably, I mean, I don't know. That's a tough question.
If you're talking about Notre Dame going up the rankings, I don't think the bye hurts them. I think the lack of a really good opponent hurts them. And now Clemson's a name opponent, but they're not a really good opponent. I mean, so from USC on, there's no big win that's going to move the needle for Notre Dame. As far as a ranking standpoint, that's just, that's just kind of where it's at. So
will be interesting to watch, though. It's an interesting question.
But if teams keep losing, like, I think it depends on who's winning. Like here's if Duke beats Wake Forest this weekend, or actually tonight, there's a chance Duke jumps back in the top 25, right? As an example. Well, and then you go and look at the rest of Duke's schedule and you say, okay, well, they beat Wake Forest this weekend, and then they've got at North Carolina. Well, okay. Now all of a sudden they win that. They got Virginia, Pittsburgh. If they can kind of go 3-1 down the stretch, there's a chance they finish ranked. If USC can pull off a big win against Washington this weekend, maybe beat UCLA, maybe knock off. I mean, so then that not only knocks off teams, but then that makes Notre Dame's win look way better. So there's things like that too. Like, whereas if USC collapses down the stretch and Duke doesn't start winning, Notre Dame's going to drop in the rankings, because they're going to be like, who'd you beat? And that's kind of fair. That's how it should be. Your resume shouldn't be built on, but we had great losses. That's not what a resume should be built on. If I think Notre Dame should be ranked ahead of LSU. I do. But if LSU goes out and beats Alabama this weekend, I don't anymore. LSU now has a better resume. They have a win over Missouri, a road win over Missouri, which is better than anything Notre Dame has. and then they'd have a win over Alabama, which is also better than anything Notre Dame has, which would move them up. So it just depends on. It's not just Notre Dame not playing. It's what how else happens with the rest of Notre Dame's schedule. That's the thing. So I think that'll have a bigger impact to me. Then the last one, Ryan, I'll grab this one. This is from Irish for Life. He says, please pray for my family and friends, for the family and friends of one of the greatest coaches in college basketball, Coach Bobby Knight, proud and loyal Indiana alumni, Hoosiers, always Indiana. I know Irish for Life is a big Indiana basketball fan. And of course, anyone that's been a Big Ten basketball fan and is in anywhere close to my age group remembers some of those great Indiana teams and Bob Knight being a legend. So obviously, Coach Knight passed away yesterday, which obviously the impact was felt in the college basketball world for sure. He was certainly a legendary coach and a Hall of Famer and a phenomenal coach and great for sound bites. There's no doubt about that. So
and making sure chairs work properly.
Right. Yeah. But he was also, here's the deal. Whatever you feel about him, he's a husband, he's a father, he's a grandfather, and a wife lost her husband, sons lost their dad, and grandkids lost their grandpa. And that's always something that we forget that these coaches are humans. These players are human beings. They have lives. They have people that care about them. That has nothing to do with what they did on a basketball court or a football field. And so, yes, I think it's very appropriate to keep Coach Knight's family in our prayers because they're obviously a little sad right now with Coach's passing. But he was fun to watch. Growing up as someone in Big Ten country in the 80s and 90s, Ryan, Coach Knight, you always knew, like, man, this team is going to be good.
He even came in at the end of his career and turned Texas Tech into a decent little team for a couple of years there as well.
Yep.
So,
he did.
Coach, man.
Yeah, he was a legend. He was a legend. And Coach Mike Krzyzewski in college at West Point. So he's had a big impact.
I've heard that before.
Yeah. He was one of his point guards at West Point. Yeah. So anyway, that'll do it, Ryan.
Appreciate everyone for joining us today for Notre Dame versus Clemson game predictions. Talked about some keys to victory. Also made, of course, our picks for the game, key storylines, how we see it playing out, what could be some differentiators in the game. Hit the mailbag at the end. Before you leave, folks, if you could just please hit that like button for us. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. And make sure, if you're listening to us on YouTube, hit that notification bell. We'll let you know that not only will I be back tomorrow for the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour, which I have 2 great guests lined up also, by the way. Going to just tease that there. Make sure that you come and listen. We'll also have the post-game show on Saturday after the Notre Dame versus Clemson game as well.
Little scheduling thing too. Also, Ryan has a extra recruiting special that he recorded that will be out tomorrow morning. So that'll be on the podcast app only, which is why you also need to be subscribed to the Irish Breakdown podcast, either iTunes, Spotify, or you can just go directly through Blue Wire. But that will come out in the morning. That will not be a live show. That will publish that in the morning. So you'll definitely want to look for that too. 3 really, really interesting different segments, different topics that Ryan discussed. So you'll get that little recruiting extra tomorrow as well.
And make sure while you are on your favorite podcast platform, please, 5-star reviews are always very much appreciated. Go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. Put a little bit of intel on a very talented 2025 defensive lineman that will be visiting Notre Dame in a couple weeks on the message board. So make sure to go subscribe there. And we'll talk to you again very soon, again, on the Irish Breakdown podcast.